Yeah.
Not a yellow light like
Right.
the sun.
And it got colder.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it did.
Yeah.
You could feel the temperature
It
drop.
was pretty cool.
It did drop, yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, that's a big difference.
But there's a lot of yahoos out there.
Oh, I bet.
It's great. I don't have a state plates.
Tim and Ben, right?
I don't know where Ben was, how far north.
Bingham, I think.
It's gonna be a slow drive back on 201.
Yeah.
So we'll call the City Council Budget Workshop for April 8th, 2024 to order. This will be a workshop session to discuss the manager's proposed budget. I would suggest that we break this up and perhaps deal with revenue first, and then we'll move on to expenses, if that's all right with everyone. So I think the first order of business, if we're going to talk about revenue, is perhaps to have a discussion with the manager about revenue forecasting. We've talked back when we dealt with the fund balance about the somewhat conservative estimate that's been used in the past for non-tax revenue, and we talked about this again at the last budget workshop. So, Mr. Manager, would you have some comment on the method that's been used and perhaps adjusting that so that it's less conservative, but we still think it's a reasonable risk and not creating extra tax burden through the estimation for non-tax revenue?
Thanks, Mayor. So, as you see in the lineup, so as the mayor just mentioned, we're looking at revenues. So if you go to your revenue tab, we can start having a conversation regarding
Page 6.
page 6. Page 6.
Thank you.
So Kelsey and I took a look at where we had been estimating projections for the FY '25 distribution. So we base this off from on a couple of things. One, we take a look at what the actual funding that came in through state revenue share, and we'll talk about state revenue share first. And then we also take a look at what's the state projecting. So you have some room here. I think we were being as conservative as we can with the
6,750.
6,750,000. You can see, I think I brought that up a little bit from what the finance recommendation was. If you were to look at the state, and the state's been making adjustments to this, if you were to look at the state's projection that they're looking at for Auburn, when they do their calculation, it's based off from, there's a formula that's determined on revenue 1 and revenue 2. It's a combination of that. That was basically done when there was some effort quite a few years ago as it pertained to local sales tax and what could be done with that. There was a formula that was created so that municipalities, which would be considered service centers, had a different formula that they could be applied. And so that's what's being applied here. So revenue 1, the state's actually forecasting about $4.8 million in revenue 1 share, and they're forecasting $3.1 million for revenue 2 share. So that means the state is estimating our projected distribution for the city of Auburn to be $7.9 million. And like I said, we were being conservative, and that's where we typically land when we try to do the budget, because those are projections. There could be, anything could happen from now until the end of that FY '25 when the state pays out its last quarterly distribution, things could happen. So there's room in there for the council to consider, is that the right number for us? Should we be projecting that a little higher than the 6,750,000? You'll see our actual revenue for FY '23 was 6.3. Kelsey, where are we year to date
On this,
on state revenue share?
I didn't pull the numbers this morning. I can find out. It's labeled
We're on
detail,
page 6.
revenue detail, page 6 at the bottom right.
It's the second page.
And then we're a few lines down where you take a look at the state revenue share. The numbers above that, I wouldn't recommend the council make any adjustments to those accounts above that. Those are locked in pretty solid. Those are the vehicle excise tax, which you see that we've made increase there. That's the tree growth and reimbursement, veterans reimbursement. A lot of that we get that from the assessor's office based on who's filed for what. The personal property reimbursement, you see where we dropped that 100,000. That's the Betty project, that initiative that the state implemented back a while ago, and that's been slowly reducing. And that's the personal property tax for businesses. So we feel pretty accurate. That's where we should be landing. You'll see that it's about $100,000 less than what we budgeted last year. So, yeah, I wouldn't make any other adjustments to those other line items. State revenue share is one where you could make some adjustments. Let me see if there's some general government that we can cover right now.
A GA reimbursements, what line are those on?
I'm sorry, what's about GA?
GA
Yep.
reimbursements.
Yeah, we could talk about that. So, yep. That's on page 7. Yeah, it's further down. Look under business and community development.
Yeah, the only comment I was going to make about that is if people have been following what's been going on in appropriations, financial affairs, they wrapped up the budget at early hours of Saturday morning to send to the floor. We've had some discussion probably in the past about the municipalities, especially the service centers, requesting a change in reimbursement from 70 to 90%. That's currently not in the budget. There is additional supplemental appropriation to be able to try to cover the 70% reimbursement. They're estimating expanded general assistance needs. So those 10 million was put in the budget for that, and then some rental eviction diversion. So in case people are following that, at this point, we should still be estimating that we'll only get 70% of our GA with no administrative reimbursement at all. Those 3 positions, we went from 1 to 3. We talked about those before. No administrative reimbursements included in the budget, and they're still at 70%. So I was at least watching that to see if we might make some changes in this line, but it doesn't look like that's going to happen.
Just real quick to answer that question about the state revenue sharing, where we are as of today. So it really is, it says today, everything's been posted as of March 31st, but it's $4,875,995 year to date for state revenue sharing.
So that's on track. That's where we need to be. Mm-hmm. So, the other thing regarding GA, you could always bring down, right, some of your GA expenses. There are certain things that we're still mandated to do. So you could say, okay, let's anticipate that that's probably going to come down a little bit. You could reduce that. But on the flip side, as the mayor was just saying, for every 100,000, say you were reducing in that budget, you're you're reducing the revenue by that 70%, right? And so you're only saving 30%. So it would only be a $30,000 savings in the budget on what you were, if you were using like $100,000, use a round number. The other piece in there is that CDBG reimbursement. We're really at the max of the administrative allotment that CDBG provides for us. So that is hitting that maximum. And then I was told when I was speaking at the last meeting, I did flip the CDBG position, should have been to GA, not GA. I think I had said that that position was coming, that second position. So that came from a CDBG position, but now it's coming into the budget. So that is that added position.
Same person.
Yeah, we shifted the same person, but it was,
Just
but the
off-
funding stream shifts. Yeah.
Any questions about revenue, Council White?
Yeah, looking at the revenue sharing and then just where we are today, if you took 1/3 of, the 3/4 we have so far, that would put us at 6.4. So it's about $500,000 over the projection on this budget. So I would think we could do about 7.1 or 7.2, on the next year. And that would still be, that'd be cutting it back about 9%,
Yeah. Yeah.
just to be conservative. But you'd still be, adding what, 350,000.
Right. Yeah, so that's definitely one area where you have some room. The other thing regarding revenue, the mayor talked to me earlier today regarding EMS revenue. If you've read some articles that are out there regarding some other communities on non-transport EMS revenues. I talked to the chief after I spoke with the mayor. We're not projecting, there's been a change regarding legislation as it pertains to being able to bill for a non-transport EMS service. It's nothing that I would recommend we put into the budget, only because it's uncertain exactly what will insurance companies pay. And then we would really want to take a look at what's trending, what's happening, other people that are out there doing it. And we can certainly be moving in that direction, but the concern is we might be spending more in administrative costs with our third-party billing than we would actually collect. And so this budget, we have no non-transport revenue in the budget, but next year we'll certainly look at that depending on what's taking place and what the historical return has been for some of the other communities that are attempting this.
So what you're saying is EMS responds to a call. The person ends up being
Saying
okay.
no
and
transport, yeah.
Can stay home. I'm gonna be okay. And so they go back to, we don't charge anything for that.
That's right. That's our city-level EMS service that we provide.
We only charge
Currently,
if
we
they
do not
take an
fee for that.
ambulance to
That's
the
right.
hospital. Okay.
Right, so some of the other cities, as the city manager said, there was a change in the statute that allowed you to bill for this and to bill insurance companies. There isn't a really good history right now because the city that started doing it, there was some confusion and they were charging 200% of the amount, so it's really hard to tell what the payment was going to be. The concern here is, A, whether insurance companies will pay it, and a lot of these folks aren't going to pay if the insurance company doesn't pay it. So we need to figure out going forward if it's even worthwhile to engage in the effort to bill them, track them, write them off if they don't pay, and see if we'll actually get any substantive revenue. But there's a discussion going on in the mayor's coalition about this, so we can just track that, I think, going forward and see what happens.
Yeah, in 2000, I was looking back, in 2009, part of this is when, obviously municipal budgets were really being reduced, and we were looking at every option for revenue stream. The councils that were on at that time might remember we did some service impact fees, and part of that was we were billing for police and fire response to motor vehicle crashes. State of Illinois had initiated that. We took that same program, we brought it in, and we did not collect, we were not collecting anywhere near being able to cover the expenses of the third-party billing. And so we stopped doing it. There was nothing really, there's no teeth to be able to force the insurance companies to actually pay for that. And so we backed away from that service impact fee. So this might be something similar, and so that's why it's going to be important to watch. But nothing that we want to put in revenue at this time.
That revenue's not in this budget.
It's not in this budget. We did increase the EMS revenue to 1.7, which aligned more aligned with what we were collecting for our revenue based off from the FY '23 revenue.
Other questions on revenue?
No, I was just going to follow up on that comment. It makes sense to look at the profile. I could imagine there's a fair number of folks where EMS is responding and they might not even have insurance. So
That's right.
like we need to figure that profile out.
Yeah. We can talk about that because we do break it down based off funding that's coming in direct from the patient, and then those that we're collecting from the state, and then what we're collecting from insurance companies.
And when finance provides the quarterly financials, there's a breakdown in there on EMS, and it'll show month over month what the new billings were, what the collections were, outstanding balances for the various categories, Medicare, insurance, and there's a pretty detailed breakdown.
The only other thing in revenue, I brought forward just a continuation from the previous year, was the $60,000 in opioid funds that was allocated for the PACE program within PD. We did not draw down that, and we won't draw that down this year because of just staffing on the PD side. So I carried that forward, but that'll be something I think would make sense after the budget for us to really talk about the opioid settlement and funding that's in there, and what, as a council, would you want to see that towards, but there would at least be 60,000 that we're looking at here.
Could we take that and allocate it to another, like homeless or GA or something like that?
I think there's probably not GA, but I think you could thread the needle pretty well with something regarding our homeless initiative. I think that there's a good correlation there. But I think it would involve just a larger conversation to talk about as a city. We can forecast what we think we'll be seeing for some funds. There's still some that are, I get emails pretty regularly about some other settlements that are being discussed and reviewed. The state's doing a great deal of education within the funds that they're capturing. And so I think it would make sense for us to do more direct service and less on education. Let the education component trickle down to the municipalities.
Or allocate it towards when we're responding to people that are having ODs and allocating the money towards that? Something along those lines? Project support you?
Yeah, I think that I would agree with the manager. There's a whole long list of ideas like that would be
We'll do it
valid
later.
that we should talk about. But I think the idea of making sure it's directed towards something related to opioid addiction is a good idea. And then the other thing we're going to need to talk about is these are not indefinite funds that you can build an ongoing budget on. It's not one-time money, but it's at least the settlements so far are quite front-end loaded. So we have the first year, we're getting the second year this year. Over the first 3 or 4 years, you get 35%, 40% of your funds, and then it's kind of variable. So I think, we need to think about what we can do with that. Other questions on the revenue side?
I had a question, I don't know if this is revenue or not, we can push it if it's not, but on the first page under the tax levy, it's kind of related to the revenue. Could you just explain what the overlay figure is? Sorry. Could you explain what the overlay figure is on the tax levy?
Yeah.
The numbers weren't adding up, and then obviously that's why.
So they back into that overlay number towards once the commitment is determined at the end of the year. And some of that is dependent on what we believe would be needed for someone who might challenge their taxes, right? If they say, I don't believe that my value is at that amount, and so if we were to have to change out or back out what we anticipated on collecting from, say, a large manufacturer, right? The overlay would be used for that. And so, so we don't put a number in for overlay. A lot of times that's because we still don't know what that assessed value is going to be at this point, but that overlay, the assessor works within the finance department to figure out, okay, based on these numbers, this is where we're at. Because if you take a look at it, the odds of us actually hitting the same mill rate 2 years in a row or 3 years in a row, it just doesn't happen. It happens because of the overlay adjustment. And so, so that'll be used to offset that. If you look at the previous year, I think it was like 109,000 that was put in from the overlay. That kept the mill rate at that 22.75. This time to keep it at that similar, but anticipating that there were a lot of changes that took place with the market adjustment for multifamilies, assessor felt more comfortable putting some additional funds in that overlay to ensure that we were in a good place in case anything was challenged.
Other questions on revenue?
Just to follow up on that, if it doesn't get used, where does it go?
Fund balance.
Councilman.
Does the revenue sharing come in monthly from the state? No.
Quarterly.
Okay, let's, we'll move on to expenses. I guess a few thoughts about this. I think there's a few things, having had the chance to review the manager's budget, that the counselors might think about, one of which is if there are items that are priorities for you that are not currently in the budget that you would want to see in the budget. I think that along the same vein, if your priorities are different, meaning if the first one, if there's something you don't think's in there at all, some program or service you want to add it, increase the overall budget. Like the second one would be if within this budget your priorities are different, you want to take X out of, you know, a certain amount of money out of service X and move it over to service Y. And then I think if either on a percentage basis or a dollar basis, if counselors have concerns about the overall budget number, where service reductions would be made. I think based on the prior to workshop discussions, the vast majority of the budget increase that is within control of the council is predominantly in salary and the associated benefit increases. And, you know, since we're people-driven, if there's going to be reductions, it really means a decrease in services. When you start cutting people, you're going to be decreasing the service that's provided. So I think if we're having discussions about the overall numbers, it would be helpful for the city manager to understand our priorities and where we think, if we're suggesting reductions, where those service cuts would be made.
Yeah, and if I could, before we start, just a few of you had asked questions throughout the week, which was great. I think some of you I got back to, some of it we're still digging in just to get some of the numbers for you. But just for the whole council to know what was asked from some others. One was regarding the salary increases. What was that number for FY20 in the FY25 budget? How much of the salary increase that would have been allocated used in FY24, but for the negotiating of contracts? So Kelsey and I kind of worked through that. I think it's around $1.8 million, roughly, is what would have been in the that previous budget that's now coming into this budget. Someone had asked regarding salaries for non-union personnel. So it's about staffing wise, we hit around 20, a little less than 20% of the staff is non-union. But salary wise, it's closer to 25%. That's driven mostly because your non-union staff tend to be your management personnel. So about 4.5 million of that budget is non-union personnel. And then I was also asked regarding what do we think about fund balance. So we won't know for certain in this. We're talking about the FY25 budget. We still have to lock down the FY24 fund balance. And so that's currently being, the FY23 fund balance is currently being audited. And so, but where we know where we closed up, we don't have the actual number in. We anticipate, even with the allocations that have been made by the council to date, based on where we think FY23 will come in, is probably around 16, just over 16%. And then the max recommended amount is around 14%, right? So we know we'll have 2.5% probably that's going to be over within the fund balance. And so, but that's a moving number. We don't really know for certain. There could be other allocations that are made out of the fund balance that you have all the authority to do. But we feel pretty comfortable with that 3 million, somewhere around 3.3 million probably. You'll know that and have that. We're hoping, let's hope for September this year. I think it was October, November. Actually, it was November last year before we finally finalized that. But some of that has to do with our auditors and when they can get the work done. Kelsey's been working with them right along. They've been in and out with requests. So that's kind of where I think that kind of covers the fund balance pieces. The other piece was regarding some open positions, I think. Open positions, we haven't had any open positions that are probably greater than 3 months, other than revolving positions. And those are the ones where we might have a fire department position that's posted. We'll fill it, and then now we have two more firefighters that are leaving. And so some of those in PD sometimes tend to be PD for patrol officers, firefighters, and then equipment operators. Those tend to be, we never really take those ads down because they tend to just be revolving numbers for us. So like, I think we're anticipating a retirement in fire. So that'll be, even though we just hired 7 new firefighters, we have 2 more that are leaving. And we still have 1 vacancy. So we're constantly chasing them. Other positions within the city, 3 months, we track this on a regular basis of how long has the position been open, and then how long before we have it posted, and then how long before they're filled. And so we track that pretty closely so we know where we are within our position count. But there's nothing that we've been sitting on. I've kind of tapped the brakes on hiring right now. And so some of the positions that we've had posted, I've just kind of, let's wait. We've got a couple weeks here. We still have them posted. We'll continue to go through that process, but I want to make sure we're in a good place here. And so just to be fair to the candidates that'll be applying. Yeah, so those are the updates. Those are the questions that I got. I think I've covered them all.
Any questions from the council on those items? Council Con?
Thanks, Mr. Mayor. Mr. Manager, just to make sure I'm understanding the 16% estimate, is that before or after what is in the budget for the transfer of 1.5 mil from the fund balance?
Yeah, so that's taking into account it's not taking into account for this one. It's taking into account for the FY 23, which was less than that. But yeah, it does take that into account. Sure.
Yeah.
Yes.
Just a comment, doing a little, rough math, it looks like the previous council was able to have a budget that was about 3% lower on expenses based on the union contracts that were retroactive for prior service. So, that obviously has an impact this year.
Yeah, Because even though the contracts are expired, the step increases aren't, and so those continue. So those increases were really driven by step increases, a non-union increase was factored in, but it was factored in under salary reserve, not into the line items. So this year, I have it all factored in, all of 25 increases for every unit, which is non-union, union, are factored into their line items this year, so.
Mr. Mayor, one thought I had, and this relates to the fund balance and questions that I asked Phil about. I was struggling with the reality that we are in fact paying for estimate of 1.8 million additional salary increase than we would typically, if things had lined up, in the magical wand had been so that things had lined up and that those increases could have been last year. I'm sure that is driving a huge, big part of that, a large 13% increase on the city side, and the overall of 8.5. So one thought I had was maybe exploring and having a discussion about the pros and cons of taking a little bit more out of fund balance than we typically do to kind of cover some or a portion or all of kind of that untypical increase in salary increases as one option, as opposed to, because I think the only other option is we're going to be asking the manager to cut people. So that was just something I thought about, and I'd love to hear people's thoughts.
Yeah, so I think you have to really put some thought into this, because what you have to be careful about is, in effect, a fund balance is one-time money. And if you start funding ongoing operations of the fund balance, you're going to create a significant problem in the out years, not for the same cause as we had here with the salaries, but it's the same concept. So let's say we just make up a number, right? Let's just say in addition to this, what's in here, we pulled in of what we're expecting in this upcoming fund balance. We pull in $2.5 million, and we use it to supplant a tax increase this year. You can only do that so long, and then what's going to happen is you're going to have your regular potential year-over-year tax increase, plus you got to fund the $2.5 million. And if you remember, the superintendent didn't go into detail on this, but the superintendent, when she talked about the school budget, and Council Platts, you might have talked about this when they had the school budget hearings. They are putting $2.5 million in fund balance. They have a bit of a different governing statute about how much money they can maintain in their fund balance, but this is it. Unless they accrue additional fund balance, say contracts come in less than they estimated, or they have vacant positions that they don't fill, they can't do it again. So the problem you would have, if that were the case, you've got to pick up any additional expenses that you have in the next budget year, plus that $2.5 million. So the concept, I think, in the past has been to try, if the fund balance is exceeding the 14%, is to try to direct the excess, in this case, say the difference between the 14 and the 16%, to one-time things that you might pull back from, like your capital plan, things that are one-time expenses, so you don't create that out-year increase that you got to fund.
Right. Yeah, and because it's just creating that cliff that next year. My goal, actually, when I was working on this budget was to, I had started off, Kelsey and I, our first meeting, we actually had reduced the fund balance by about 500,000. So it was going to be 1 million. The goal would be to try to eliminate that, really. That should be where that should be it. It shouldn't be a stabilization account, and so, so the goal was, how can we maybe eliminate that? And, but I also introduced into this budget, which is new out of the expense line item, and that's something we can talk about, is the 500,000 for, I think actually it was 480,000 for the capital expenses, so that we're not bonding that. As a council, you could say, you know what, let's do that. It's a great idea, but let's do that next year instead of this year. Or you could do part of it, and we could adjust some of those numbers. So that is something that you have some room on. But to do both this year, dropping the 500,000 from the fund balance and adding the 500 in expenses, that was already putting us at about $1 million greater than where I had anticipated us to be at. And so I only went with half of that. And so I went with the 500,000 in expenses.
Just for a frame of reference, on the city expense operating expenses, which would be on first line on page 5, in effect, to reduce that percent change, back of the napkin math, it's around we'd have to cut, we either have to raise 400,000 in additional revenue or cut 400,000 in expenses for each percentage point. Am I reading that correctly?
I did some additional math. Assuming the school gets to 5%, we would need to cut 950,000 from the city side to get to 6.5 overall. So,
Yeah, and so to keep in mind, when you talk about the city side, we're also talking about county, if you go back to that sheet that I had provided to you before, some of those are numbers that are just they're in the city side budget, but we don't have any control over it, I guess you could say.
yeah. So I was also assuming that those intergovernmental, those are fixed, right? I mean, the county tax is
They are and they're
what
not.
it is. I
Yeah.
just assumed that we
Yeah.
left that alone.
Yeah. County tax is fixed, nothing we could do with that. If you look at the manager's recommendation, and this is something that I've placed in, I think I still need to circle back with the city of Lewiston to see where they're coming at with some of their other intergovernmental ones where we don't match is we don't match on LA Arts. That depends on what LA Arts provide us, and it's different than what they provide the city of Lewiston. So Lewiston actually pays a little bit more in LA Arts. But where we're 50-50 on is the LA 911. And so I had asked the director regarding using a little bit more of their fund balance, just like us. They're very, protective of doing that. But I still put a reduction, if you look at the manager's request, it is a reduction from what they had proposed. Now, that doesn't mean that Lewiston would match that if you were to say, yeah, I think that's the right number. But we would need to have a little bit more conversation on that.
Councilor Gary.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Boy, I'm sounding hoarse tonight. Sorry about that. When it comes to employees, I kind of didn't pay attention, or we didn't pay attention to the amount of new staff or adding on, I guess it's the same thing, adding on staff and stuff. I think there's a lot of positions that are more managerial than we've had in the past. And I'm not sure how, now that we've got them in there, how we can cut back on them. With that said, with the recommendation of those employees that we want to hire, the different departments, I don't want to hire any additional employees, with possibly the exception of, at least for a trial basis, the one in the police department to help the police officers with their data entry and reports and stuff. And I have mixed feelings at this point in time to add on another deputy chief. And those other ones, I don't, unless there's some sort of way to pay for them that's not a grant and not totally, anything that's going to go away once we get them in.
Yeah, and I don't know, when you talk about managerial staff, I don't know how many, you've been on the council for a long time, so I don't know how long you're talking of some of those changes, because we've done structural changes for many years. If you're talking about from this previous budget to this budget, the only managerial change was with the Public Services Department, and we did not replace Public Works with a deputy Public Works Director. So we moved the position. Dennis was the Public Works Director. We moved Dennis to Public Services. So he's now overseeing multiple departments. But we did not replace, when Scott moved to Public Works, we did not replace Scott in the public, and as a deputy director, if that makes sense. So, other than that, no other structural changes of management from last year to this year.
Well, that's the thing, we weren't given a flow chart. Like, I was not, conceptually, I just thought of planning and permitting as one department. Now, when you go online, you got planning and permitting, you've got economic development, you've got community development. It's 3 different pods, and like in the community development, you've got Glenn, you got Zach's replacement, as well as a trickle down. I mean, I can understand adding general services to for general welfare, because I know there need an increase. But it just seems like from what was a small, compact department, that is now is all over the place. And then like with our, I know people wanted us to communicate more, but even that has kind of grown. And so I don't know how to rein that in, since it's already rained out, other than to look very carefully at whatever else that's being added. And I mean, and then like you just said, Dennis Dute got promoted up, and then Scott, I can't remember his last name. Colin. He got promoted up to sort of be Dute's position. And then you just mentioned that there's nobody under him. But is there more pecking order with a bigger price salary and benefits? And then you've got Mark Gosling as head of the the Norway Savings Bank and tourists and all that stuff. And then you've got, it just seems like there's just so many chiefs and not a lot of Indians. And there's got to be a way that we, a city our size, can downsize some so that we're saving taxpayer dollars and making, I mean, until we start growing to 30,000 people, it seems like our budget is comparatively higher with municipalities quite a lot bigger than we are.
Well, we've done those numbers, and I can certainly provide that. I wouldn't, we've done the comparisons on per capita based on our budget compared to other communities. We could do that again to provide you that, just so that you can see we're not at the top and we're not at the bottom. We're kind of in the middle, and that's, I think we would still be tracking that way. That's why I had asked earlier about the years that you're talking about, because some of those shifts that you were talking about were 4 years ago. So yes, those happened. Those were restructures that took place, but it was 4 years ago that restructure regarding economic development, public planning and permitting, and community development. And then we have the history too. And then so that this will be really, council, just where you want to get at that, because we can take a look at historically. We have the employee counts for each department. We can provide that. We eliminated GA as a director when we made the changes, and we brought GA in as a service under community development, so it was no longer a director's position. So there's been a lot of movement that way, but we can dig right into however far you want to go. We have the employee counts going back over years, and so we can provide that and demonstrate this is what we're doing. I think we constantly look for efficiencies. I think we're constantly looking at, does it make sense to combine the city clerk's office, the change that we did with city clerk with Sue leaving. It's no longer that city clerk's position will now be under Kelsey. So that way there we've been collapsing departments is what we've been doing. And so of the probably close to 19 management director or a senior management position, we probably have 8 that are now, they have management under them, and so they're reporting up. So So we don't have that large span of control that used to be operated under the city manager's office. We've been collapsing those in a way that tends to make sense for us, and for some that they may not even have a department, a person of one, right? Economic development's a person of one. So some of the other positions, and I can provide you with what we're tracking with positions for, and I have that tonight, and I can provide that if we want to get into that. TIF dollars that are offsetting some of those positions as well, just so you know where some of those administrative costs are coming at. So that's that 1.5 million that you see come back in from TIF dollars towards administration. What positions do they cover? And we have those. Most of them, there's some that are 100%. Jay's department, his old department, is 100% under economic development, under the TIF funds, rather. Some of the other positions are, we try to factor it in based on, whether it's 40% of their time is really spent on work that's towards economic development. And so those would be numbers that we'll need to watch as we talk about, okay, if we're going to reduce, I want to make sure we're not reducing something that has a revenue offset. But we can do that. We can walk through that.
Council Platt?
Yeah, if I could make a comment, I guess to echo Counselor Gary's opinions, I feel similarly, maybe from a different angle, but, and to give some concrete numbers, I had my head wrapped around, is it possible to get the total budget down to 6.5%? I understand the implication on the city budget, what that would mean. I also have concerns about the number of positions that are increasing. If this were to happen every year for the next 10 years, we'd have another 100 employees in this city a decade from now, and that scares me a little bit. Looking at the list of new positions, I think you've already made some recommendations that I would agree with, not hiring the recreation program specialist. But I, also have, I guess I wasn't entirely convinced of the value, and I could be convinced, but, a long-range city planner. Like I know that's something that department wants, but given the current climate of our economy, I wonder if that's something that's worthwhile. I don't know. I wasn't at that presentation, so I watched that one on YouTube. I guess I hate to say it with you in the room, but the executive assistant in the finance department, I'm not quite sure what that person is necessary for. I mean, I know what executive assistants do. I've never had one. I've never known too many people to have them. So, I'm just curious, does that person have 40, 50 hours of work to do for, these additional salaries? I had some additional just things that I saw in the line item budgets, spending $100,000 a year for the clerk's office on document restoration. Document restoration is very important. $100,000 a year is significant. What could you do for 75? What could you do for 60? I had questions, not to just throw all my thoughts out, but I might as well. Sorry.
Yeah, perhaps, this is going to get pretty far-ranging really quickly, so hold on to those. Maybe we can talk about some of this personnel stuff for a minute. So from what I'm hearing, there's sort of three things I think perhaps that should be considered. Along the lines of what Councilor Geary brought up, it seemed to me the point really was, is all the existing staff that we have necessary? And I think if there's suggestions about where that might be trimmed back, then we should identify, councilors should identify what those particular positions are. I think for the new positions, perhaps we should talk about them in two separate groups, right? Unless there's anyone here on the council that thinks the three positions that the city manager did not include in his budget should be brought in. If anyone thinks any of those three should be pulled in, then let's talk about that. Otherwise, we can move on.
It's your sheet that looks like this. If you all have it.
And I guess now that I'm looking at it, I see the long-range city planner is a funded position with TIF appropriation, so.
Yeah, so then if no one is, thinks we should bring those three in, there's two other groups, right? There's a group of positions that are funded through some way, and there's a group of positions that would be on the general tax levy. Councilor Geary?
Sorry. Let's see if that cleared me up a little bit. The recreation position,
that's, currently is not, just so we're all clear, that's in the group that's not recommended, right? Okay.
Right, because I am very passionate about the grab-and-go program that we're feeding a lot of Auburn-specific residents, families and seniors that don't all go to the outside food banks. And I'm not sure if we cut that position, that will take away the grab-and-go grocery program. And that's another thing that I want added to the budget, is funding for the grab-and-go.
Right, are those, Mr. Manager, are those tied together? If my recollection is, grab and go was estimated at about, is not included in your recommendation, but was estimated at about $70,000 for next year. And are those two tied together? In other words, if you put grab and go back in, you also have to add the person to support it?
That's correct. Yeah. Yeah, partially. So it's not a full-time position. That position is shared as with PAL, but because PAL moving, I reduced that. It's not, that's certainly not a department manager recommendation, but it's one that I'm proposing. So those who don't have that sheet, here's that sheet that's coming around.
And Mr. Manager, the 70,000, that, is that what has been historically? Or does that also include the expected increased costs, given you're not going to have the same freezer space until the PAL Center is ready?
I believe I think they've covered that, so I think that's just the cost of the programming and that's historical based on what was being provided through a combination of ARPA funds and CDBG funds. So I think that's what they're projecting. So
to add grab and go back in, if those two are joined, total is about $125,000 to add to the budget.
Well, I think you're looking at just salary too, so we'd have to factor in the fringe component.
And
I'm
salary
looking at
and
salary
fringe.
and
On the
fringe
sheet, I'm
on
sorry.
here.
Yep,
Yeah, so
great.
about
Yep.
125.
Yep, I'm sorry. Yep.
And the grab and go, is that something that we did as an ongoing, because I know that came in around COVID, right?
No,
It came in before? Yeah,
s-
so
I'm
I'm just
sorry
curious
for-
how long we've been doing it and understand it.
I'm sorry for interrupting you.
That's okay.
I
No,
beg
that-
your pardon. Before it was grab and go, it was grab and go meals. They were providing meals at the senior center, and people were either coming in to get their meals, or I was helping to deliver, me and a few others were doing more meals. Then eventually it morphed into the grab and go grocery program, but I'm pretty sure that it was started before COVID.
No,
Mr. Manager, can you, when I reviewed the ARPA funding, my understanding was that that was a ARPA-funded COVID program.
Yeah, it started March 20th, 2020, was for COVID, and it was a come-in, pick-up, wasn't delivery. So, yeah, it was being run out of the senior center. And then the initial funding was ARPA, I think, to
Rescue.
try to make it continue through the end of this well, it wasn't even to the end of this fiscal year, but we were able to use some CDBG funds to continue it so that we had better notification, so people could plan on the program ending. And so those additional funds were provided by the council to kind of continue it, so there was proper good notification.
Yeah. So my thoughts on that are, I mean, that's part of a larger, to me, a question with a deteriorating economy and increasing homelessness and the need that we should be, I'm not against the program, certainly, and I was there at the beginning helping. But I think it's almost like a bigger picture is what are we going to do about the increasing homelessness, the increasing need, the increasing, the deteriorating economy, all the things that are increasing rents, costs of everything. So I think that we need to talk about that, because I certainly think there's no shortage of need, but where, in what context are we best doing it is my question. So I'm not saying no by any stretch of the imagination to the grab and go. I think it's been effective, but are we addressing a symptom that's or are we actually solving a problem by keeping that going? That's my,
So,
I think
Yep.
it's solving a problem, because with, like you just mentioned, everything on the outside going up, including rents, that gives some people, especially seniors and young families, they have to choose, some of them, between medicine and food. Or they end up not being able to buy good food choices and has to settle for 10th best. I mean, there's only so much macaroni you can eat. You gotta have fruits and vegetables and meats in a rounded diet. Because if we don't have enough of the right stuff, then we get an unintended consequence of more people going to the hospital and becoming sicker, and adds even to our medical calls.
so just to point out, to follow up on Counselor Milk's comments, the manager can confirm this, but I don't see, when I review the budget, that there's any funding in there for homelessness. So considering, even the temporary warming shelter that's happened over the winter, this coming winter, we don't have anything in the budget to cover that either.
That's correct.
I guess just to clarify my point, I think if it was a new item, and now after the pandemic, and are we going to continue to provide that service as an ongoing, which is something we didn't do beforehand, and there's gonna be more need. So what is our threshold, I guess?
Counselor Cowan?
Yeah, just to follow up on your comment, Councilor Milks, I agree, we need to think of that broader spectrum. I think we need to figure out how we're gonna cover homelessness, is, that issue. And we can think about that more broadly, right? There's this expanded need. We're already putting in the budget for greater general assistance, kind of couples along with that. So I think we have to, if we're going to continue that, we had a shorter time frame. I think we're going to be anticipating a longer winter season that we're going to have to cover. I do wonder, the idea of trying to make sure that we're providing the right support so that we're preventing folks from getting into even more dire straits. Totally for that. I do think if we decided as a group to fund some or all of the grab and go this coming year, we should be proactively looking to see if there are ways we can adjust that program. Could we get a little bit more money, mileage out of our money invested if there's some way to get it through the general assistance, or is there groups that we can get out there to talk with Hannaford or other corporations that might be willing to put in some money to cover some of these special situations. So we don't have the time right now in the next couple of weeks, but I think that should be something we look at. I think there's opportunities for us to be thinking about how to partner with other organizations so we're not footing the entire bill down the road.
Counselor Walker?
That's exactly where I was going to go with this. We need to find a way of partnering with other people to bring the cost of this down and have maybe more people involved. But with the Powell building going away for a while, it really would put a lot of pressure on either building we would use down at Pettingill, because that's probably the only other space that we could even do any of that. And I think them two buildings right now are really maxed out as much as if you were down there all the time to see it, I think this would really put a lot of pressure on them people in the building as well. So I think we need to really strongly say to the manager, we got to partner with somebody somewheres, or two or three others.
Yeah, so, Mr. Manager, I have a few questions based on this conversation. So, general assistance has state mandated thresholds, right? Income thresholds in order to qualify. What are the threshold criteria for participation in grab and go?
There's not.
So anybody can sign up for it, and we just take their application. We're not administering some qualification
That's right.
requirements.
Yep.
And to Councilor Geary's point, and perhaps Counselor Gary would know more about this than I would. My understanding is that part of the challenge with grab and go is the delivery portion. Because there's some people, because it seems to me that some of the same food availability is there through other groups in the community, like the food pantries, but they don't deliver. You have to go there. So I'm not an expert on that. Someone might know, but if that were the case, it would seem like instead of trying to duplicate that program, perhaps we could assist in some way with the transportation. If they don't deliver it, for those people that aren't mobile, there might be some way to help deliver the foods.
Respectfully, Mr. Mayor, right now, for sure, delivery is made to most all of the senior complexes, buildings that are managed through Auburn Housing Authority. Bags are filled and they're dropped off, and then other tenants will help to make sure that they're delivered. And we're not talking, the good mayor has seen our grab-and-go bags. They're not overloaded. It's not boxes and boxes. It's enough to help supplement what they buy for a week with their groceries. I mean, it could be potatoes, it could be vegetables, it could be some sort of, at least one, if not two, if they can do it, meat or bread or eggs, and they do get donations from other places and things. And I don't mean any disrespect to Councilor Walker. I'm sure at Hasty, in one of those spare bays that they have on that side, that could potentially hold some stuff. But then the food that they get, I mean, if they don't have the storage, I mean, they get only as much as they need. They kind of get a guesstimate on what they need each week, and it's gone. And then they have to start over again. So just because we may or may not have space because the PAL Center is going away is potentially a moot point if it comes in quick and it's gone.
Make sure I understand how this worked. I might be mistaken. I thought the food for grab and go was coming from the Good Shepherd Food Bank, and what was happening once it was provided to Auburn was it split up into the delivery bags to be sent out. But we're not storing and warehousing food, are we?
Some
we
stuff.
will. Depends on when we pick up. A lot of it has to do with what they're bringing in, what's available. So they might have something that's a greater amount that's available. They'll bring it up, but they know they're going to distribute that, depending on what it is, especially some of the frozen food. They might distribute that over a couple-week period rather than just that 1 week. So it varies, but we are storing. As Councilor Cowan had mentioned, that's why we're using some other resources. And being very mindful of what we're bringing in now, so that when we bring it in, it goes right back out. So,
Also, local farm places, they also donate stuff. So there is other things coming in. Sometimes Hannaford will call and they'll say, we've got this load or something. Or Walmart. I mean, the people that are running grab and go work hard to make sure that whatever dollars they get are spent very wisely and they don't overspend. As the good mayor's seen, those are not exorbitant bags.
Yeah, I guess my question was if there's other providers in the city, like the food pantries, could they handle the food piece and then have some delivery? Councilor Cowan?
I agree that I think the delivery part is the biggest challenge for most food pantries that purchase produce and food goods from Good Shepherd. But I think it's just important to think there still has to be a purchase. There has to be dollars, right? So it's there. We would need to. A big part of the partnering would be, in addition to the transportation. I'm confident that over time we could eliminate 70,000 out of our budget by partnering with corporations or businesses or even our residents who would be willing to donate dollars to that, because it's a tangible thing that I think people would be passionate about. So.
Yeah, I mean, I think moving forward, I think what is beneficial here is that, you know, if this continues on, it's, do you, in this partnership, is that something you hand to someone else rather than the city running a program, right? And that's kind of where we're at on this. And a good portion of this is, you know, I think the numbers were close to 60%. I think we're Auburn Housing. So if that's a need from Auburn Housing, then maybe we work with Auburn Housing to say, you need to bring some of this to your locations to help distribute to your tenants.
Council Whiting?
Yeah, I was just gonna say, this is one of those fiscal cliff things where we had the ARPA money and it was funded, and now the funding has run out, and we're facing a big budget, you know, increase that people don't want to see happen. So, to me, this was not intended, this was temporary, this was not intended to be a permanent program, and I agree with the idea of trying to continue it, but it's not the city's responsibility to run a small food program. We've got EBT, that's a national program that's underfunded. We should be lobbying Congress to fund that better. I just think this is one of these nagging little things that it's important to people, but we just can't, if we're gonna argue about this, we're never gonna get anywhere with this budget on the bigger picture.
Council
Mr. Mayor, if one thought for us to, and we may need to come back to this, but if we do want to identify funding for support, you know, to cover homelessness and other things, a question I have is, do we need to fund some portion of a staff person to help coordinate that from our end or not? And that we may be way too far ahead of that one, but I just wanted to throw that out. I think you've been thinking about it, Mr. Mayor. So.
Yeah, so, look, if you think about the homeless, in effect, the cities have outsourced that, right, to provide it. We're provided funding, and I think in some ways that was some of the suggestion was on grab and go. But even to do, go back to the original funding amount, because I know counselors that I've talked to have had some concerns, especially about the hours of operation and the short-term nature of the food provision at the shelter. If you're going to do that on an ongoing basis, those become real challenges. So that, from an Auburn perspective, you know, you're talking on the order of $40,000 a month. So even if that's all you run, not an overnight shelter, just a warming center for 6 months, 5-6 months in the cold weather, you know, say from 6 at night to 8 in the morning, it's on the order of $250,000. So those are the two things I've heard here, but that's kind of the type of threshold numbers that you're talking about for these two programs together, be around $375,000. And to Councilor Whiting's point, making notes of potential add-ins here, given where we are with the budget, it seems like if we're going to add anything on, we need to identify something to take off just to get back to our starting point, which I think the sense of the council is too high now. So, you know, the back of the napkin, $400,000 is about 1% on that city operating side. If you add these two programs back in there for this coming year, you got to find $400,000 to cut someplace else in the budget just to get us back to the starting point of the manager's, you know, the gross amount of the manager's recommendation. So we sort of keep on a theme here as we go. Are there any other things other than grab and go and homeless services that counselors, when you reviewed this, were things that you thought needed to be added into the budget that weren't in the manager's recommendation?
I've got a question, sort of. Given the weather and the circumstances, our roads are in such disrepair. Has there been thought of how we're going to fund all the patches and things that we need to, Mr. Manager, do you have an idea what we may have left from this year's budget? Or should we freeze the budget for the next few months to get some extra money so that we can fix the roads and not add so much to your budget? Or work with ARTC or some agency that may know of matching funds so that we can draw down money if we can add more money to the road repair line item?
So, couple things with that. First, every matching dollar that we have available to us that we can go after, we go after. So there's nothing left on the table, I guess you could say, with ATRC or some of the DOT match funds that we have in. Those are pretty baked. They're baked in, and if those formulas are there, we work with AvCog and that group related to that. Some of the road disrepair that you're experiencing right now is as a result of them not being able to do the full patch. That we're using material right now that any rain wash off or plowing or anything else will go away. It just doesn't stay. So there's a team that's out constantly until that material, and that has to do with temperature and when that material changes, we'll be able to go and start doing a lot more patching that I think will be long term. So we always have this window, and unfortunately it's always around budget time that we have that window where the roads seem like they're at their worst. Not that we don't have roads that are in some disrepair, and we have those factored in, but for the most part, everything you're referring to would be in the capital line item and not in the operating. And so if we, not to say that you couldn't find dollars that you could say, how do we take those dollars and apply those? But then it's about what we have available for designing, going out to bid, and what's the, how many roads could we actually get repaired within a fiscal year? We basically are pushing up against that every year. And we are this year with the projects that we have. So the projects that you're seeing are ones that have been in the works for probably 3 years. And so, there's, you could put some additional dollars, but you're not going to see an immediate change in that. And so it would be multiple years out or 2 years out before you would see that. But a lot of that's going to be discussed when we talk about capital, because that's going to be an area where we will need to, depending on how tonight goes, my goal was to kind of work on capital at your workshop next week. And so, but we would need to dig into that because you've got a lot of requests, and especially one specific road of a $3 million request where, we'll have to decide whether or not, what you'd like to do with that.
So a couple things to think about. A lot of this discussion, I agree with the manager, be deferred to when we do the CIP. A couple things to remember: the CIP plan that we have approved, which doesn't lock us into the funding, has I think it's pretty clear that the request for the next fiscal year for CIP far exceed what's going to be the ability of the council to fund that. So you'll be deciding what the priorities are and pushing some of those off. The other thing I think people need to recall is if you look at the budget driver sheet that the manager provided us last time, debt service is up $1.4 million. And in effect, what that's saying is that the previous budget, which we're now seeing the debt service come on this budget, is $1.4 million more than the amount that was being retired in bonds. So we'll have to consider all that when we look at the CIP. Councilor Cowan?
Just to switch back to personnel and looking at this sheet of additional, if I may.
Yeah, well, let me just make sure, is there anything else which would be an addition to the budget that wasn't in the manager's workshop? And then we'll go to the personnel. Any other comments that councilors have? Yeah, so, again, on the personnel, I'm not sure we finished this discussion, but for the detective, rec program specialist, and equipment operator two that were not recommended in the manager's budget, are there counselors that believe those should be added in? Okay, if not, I think then there's two other groups. Let's talk about the middle group on this chart, which was 5 positions. They're not all full year, for which there is non-tax revenue to cover those. So there are comments from counselors regarding that group. Counselor,
I'm sorry, if I could just, one clarifying. So those are revenues that we're applying to these positions. If you did not move forward with these positions, for some of these, you could apply them somewhere else. And so, Counselor Cowan, when you mentioned regarding, or it might have been, I'm sorry, Counselor Platts, regarding the city planner. So that was not so the department didn't request that, I did. And I requested it in the department's budget, so that's where that came up through. Just because future looking, that's where I would put it. If that was not funded, we would reallocate those funds to other positions that we would have available to us to be able to do that. And so, that would reduce the overall budget. So I don't want you to think that if that goes
Right.
away, you can't reapply those other funds. You can.
For some
For
of those.
That's right, yeah.
Council Miller.
Quick question, so the 3 at the bottom are not reflected in this budget?
One of them, I think one of
Are
them.
you referring to the detective, rec program specialist, and equipment operator too?
Yeah,
So the rec
those 3
specialist one,
positions
it's
are
currently
not,
funded. We do, well, it's vacant today.
It's vacant today.
The
but it's
detective.
filled.
It was funded, well, let me just make sure I cover that
It's an
right.
existing position that's
It's an
not
existing
funded.
position.
It was
The
frozen.
person just, which is no longer there now, as of today. However, it may have been funded through some ARPA funds. So it may not have necessarily been in this budget. So when you see those go away, it should not change
okay.
the budget.
You mean in the manager's those 3 positions are not in the
In
manager's
your recommended
recommendation.
budget.
My recommended budget, they're
These,
not
they're
there.
not, okay.
Yeah.
So that detective position is not something that the chief is asking for?
Oh, no, that's in the department request.
Yeah, these
Chief
three.
is asking for the detective,
That's correct.
okay? That's, I wanted to make sure I understood the.
Yeah,
that.
those bottom 3 are
But
in the
it's currently
department
vacant.
requests, but
It's
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 not
somebody leave-
managers.
Somebody left, that position's open, we're not putting it in the budget,
There's no people on these 3
Right.
positions.
but we don't have any less criminals.
So this was, my recollection of this is that there were 2, there were 2 positions in here, the detective, and up at the top block, the officer, and both of those positions were related to PACE. And they were both vacant at this time. They were both requested in the department request, and in the manager's request, the officer position was recommended, and that was for the one traffic enforcement position for PACE.
Could we fill them? Do you think that there's somebody that we could hire for those positions?
We're currently filling the positions. We currently have someone assigned part of the year to the academy as a instructor, which has opened up our slots. If you remember, we talked about that last year. So it opens up how many people we can get through the academy. So can we fill it? Yes. Will there always be? So it's one of those positions where the moment, patrol is your priority. So if your patrol numbers drop, you reassign somebody from another position that they had and you put them back in patrol. That will always happen. And so some of these positions, yes, traffic is always the one that gets pulled from. It's just,
So I guess to summarize, my feelings about this would be, if I was gonna pull, I would move the detective to the middle spot and I would take the city planner, the long-range planner, and I'd put it in the 3. And I know that that's, to me, that's where my priorities lie.
So
Is that I want to give the police department everything that we can give them, same with the fire, that's necessary, if we can. And I realize that the manager's saying that maybe not necessary, but that's where my thoughts are.
Yeah, so the question for the manager is, make sure I understand this correctly, I don't think that's a direct swap. If you want the detective in the budget, it's going to the top bucket, right? Because the TIF appropriation that would be going for the city long-range planner, is police department detective eligible for that funding?
No, it would just be shifting something else, so there's no net gain to that. It would be, we would just put that position in, move those revenues that were allocated to different positions, the budget, you know, and again, if you were to do a delayed start, you could do that, but there's no net, you're not gonna see any net gain to the budget by making that move.
And and I'm sorry, I'm going to, the senior appraiser position that's in the top, that's under the assessing department, right?
Correct.
Is that person already hired?
We did hire that position. That person just left, and so it's currently out, but it had not been in the previous budget, so that's why it's up on the top.
Okay, so that's not one we could put a detective into instead of in that position, or are we leaving that there so it gets filled? Are we gonna
You
look to
could
fill
do
it?
that. You could do that. It did, but again, it won't, it doesn't shift if we're talking about moving things within the budget numbers, which I think is different than what you're saying, more about priorities. So if we're talking about priorities, you could do that. That would be a wash. You wouldn't see any change in the budget.
Yeah, I don't think Counselor Milks's point, correct me if I'm wrong, relative to this detective, is finding cost savings in the budget. It's a matter of prioritization of what positions get funded. Is that correct?
Yes, so if I had to pick between, if it's the same amount of money, for all intents and purposes, the detective and take the senior appraiser out, put that position so that we were paying for the detective, not the senior appraiser, and have it be budget neutral. Is that possible?
It would be budget neutral, meaning that from the manager's request.
Right. It
So-
doesn't change our budget, your request to.
It would not change that. The question would be regarding workload, right? Because
Yeah.
that's the demand that
so-
we're currently anticipating through the assessor's office, is why I put that one over the other position.
So the question I would have on, it's a similar question, but for both positions. So the senior appraiser is going to be tied to the revaluation process.
That's right.
And the long-range planning is going to be tied to the comp plan process.
That's correct.
And the question I have is, let's leave aside the swapping here for a second, because I understand the prioritization, but let's just take the senior appraiser position for a minute. If we eliminate that 81.9 plus the fringe, in effect, we're not actually eliminating all that for the budget, because the contract cost to do this multi-year evaluation is going to go up, because the work that senior appraiser is going to be done will have to be procured through contract.
That's right.
To complete the valuation, and the same with the planner on the comp plan, right? Because you have money for both of those projects in the budget. I'm assuming if we just eliminate those, you're not going to say, maybe you will, but I would assume you wouldn't say, well, those contract prices will be the same. Those contract prices are going to go up because that work has to be done.
Yes. Yep.
But that becomes one-time cost, so we could pay for that. But we could pay for that out of a fund balance, and now we're not paying for salary for 25 years. We're paying one-time costs out of fund balance. So if we're looking for money where we can creatively spend where we're going to have to, right? We could
Yeah.
conceivably do that, and maybe is there any other of those types of situations?
Long as the count, yes. conceptually, I get where you're going. So let's just say they're both 3 years. You could say, oh, use the fund balance. You could fund the 1 year through this year's fund balance. This council would have to then fund those out of the fund balance the next year, and the next council the next year after that. If, in effect, we're saying that they're temporary period positions, meaning we're going to create those positions, we're going to fund them for whatever the life of the project is, and that's where the fund's going to come from.
Are we under a statutory requirement to do a revaluation? Is there a law that says we have to start that this year? Do we have to do that this year, is my question.
I don't think we should put it off too long. We've done that in the past and we paid for it dearly.
Yeah, I think that, just look across the river, I don't know, it's been 30 years since they did one, and, the state hasn't come in and hauled off the city administrator to jail for not doing it. But I agree with Councilor Walker. The problem is we're quite a ways past the standard 10-year period, and if we don't do it, two things are going to happen, or an offset of one or the other. One is we're going to have to keep doing these market rate adjustments, which to me is not the most equitable way to do it, because you're applying that increase generally to that class, like all the commercial or all the industrial, or all the multifamily. So in that, some people are getting a benefit, some are getting, in effect, overtaxed. The second thing is, if you don't do it and don't make the market adjustments, we're going to start losing revenue through these state offsets that we get. So I think we should proceed with it.
And my question, I asked before, what is the revenue offsets? What dollar amount is that we're not going to get? Because no one's answered that question for me. And so we just raised everybody's taxes last year. And now we're talking about doing it again. And it's the same people, it's residential, it's working people that are working families that have a house and go to work every day. They're the ones whose taxes are gonna go up. That's who's going.
So multifamily was last year. Previous year,
2 years
ago was single
So
family.
2 years ago was a 10 to 15% property tax increase.
Previous year was Taylor Pond, and the year before that was condos. So, I mean, I think that's the work that's being done through the office to make sure that there's, it's equitable as best as can be. By not doing it, you could, the ratio could drop, right? And then once the ratio drops, people will see it one way or another. They're either going to see it through, and I don't mean a dollar for dollar, but you'll see an impact. It's whether or not you're going to see a reduction through their homestead, because that value will drop, and then that means they're paying more on taxes because they're not capturing the full amount that's allowable under homestead. Or they'll see the change when it comes to the market adjustment. And then there's, this is one of those balancing. So I know you'd asked for a number. You have to pick which, you have to tell me if we were at a ratio of 87%, then what would that dollar number be? But I just can't throw a number out.
Right.
It was a rhetorical question.
Yeah.
That more than intended for answered here.
Yeah.
But as I understand the homestead deduction, it's a maximum of 25,000 of your value, correct?
Mm-hmm.
So that's a maximum payout, 25,000 times 22 point per thousand.
So it's
$24.
$25,000 off of your total valuation. So
But
if you
it's
have a
not-
$150,000 valuation on your home,
It's
it
now
reduces it to
$125,000.
$125,000 valuation.
But
Correct.
the
And
impact,
that's if the ratio's at 100%. We're currently at 93.
so the impact, though, is not just in the homestead exemption. It's for businesses, it's in the better. You're going to run into general revenue sharing, going to run into issues with general purpose aid to education. But to follow up on council.
$625 is what your homestead exemption is, at 25,000 times 25 a $25 mill rate. So if it was an 80% value, if we're 80%, that's $125. As opposed to
sure,
if you
but-
raise someone's valuation from 250 to 400, you're taking an extra $400 out of their pocket.
But
Not necessarily. You're not taking any more money out of their pocket if the budget stays the same, because it's a ratio and it's two variables. So if the budget didn't change year over year and you had a market rate adjustment, they would pay the exact same amount of tax because the mill rate would go down and the valuation would go up. So it's really hard to project because you don't know what the valuation change is going to be, and we never will know what the valuation, what the state says the valuation is until we're done with this budget. We can only make an estimate of it.
Am I understanding it correct that, and maybe we're too far away from talking about the budget right now, but the taxes only go up if we vote to increase the tax levy. If the tax levy hypothetically were to stay flat and there's a revaluation, obviously some people go up, some people go down, but we can really temper that change, is my understanding, mathematically anyway.
So the school budget's going up 5 point whatever percent, and the city budget's another 6% on top of that. So if we're gonna, the property values have gone up more than 10% in the last year or two. I mean, if we're gonna be real, that assessment is gonna come back and it's gonna be much higher than it was before. That's the reality, and that means people's taxes are gonna go up because our tax levy's not gonna go down that much. Because we're not cutting the school.
I think the best way to describe that is, as the mayor said, if you just lock in that there's no change in expenses, then you use the formula, and what you'll see is that levy will drop. The mill rate will drop, rather.
Yeah, but there is change in expenses. We got an increase of
Well,
5%.
But
But
those
even
separate.
even
Right,
if
but
we
this is
wanted to
separate.
get to a 6.5% increase for the city tax levy on top of the 5.4 or 5% for the school, you're talking, we need to drop $950,000 out of this budget. So, I mean, there's no way we're gonna get the city any lower than that unless you're really talking about cutting drastic and cutting services.
So
we're-
people's
we're-
taxes are gonna go up.
Well, but they're gonna go up because of the need to put more money into this budget than last year's budget, regardless of whether you have a market adjustment or not, because the mill rate will just go up higher if you don't do a market adjustment, because the bottom line dollars is, right now, what we're asking for is $3.5 million additional from last year's budget just for the city levy.
Cash in, cash out to the taxpayer.
Yeah.
If we don't reassess and we have a mill rate increase, that number's gonna be smaller than if you raise someone's valuation by $100,000.
It
No, it
can't be, because the bottom line is the bottom line. So the amount of dollars, the cash in is the cash in into the budget, and then you figure out how much is gonna come out. If you do a market adjustment, there's a chance that some people are gonna have a tax increase and some will have not a decrease. It's a revalue. It's artificial, but, I mean, it's not artificial. It's different than the full-fledged revaluation. But the bottom line is, we are talking about a 13.5% increase if we want to continue the services that were provided this past year, with salary increases for 2 years for a lot of our people, right? So we're we can try to reprioritize within these few positions here, but bottom line, if we're going to cut it way back, we're going to ask the manager. I would like to know. I wouldn't see the only way, if we were going to try to increase for city or for fire, I can't, for police or for fire, I think the only way we could reduce is drastically cutting our recreation and drastically cutting public works.
So to leave aside the valuation, right, because for us, I agree with Councilor Cowan. I mean, Councilor Mills, I understand your point about the valuation going up, but if the valuation were held constant, the amount it's not about the mill rate, it's about how big a check I have to write when I pay my taxes. So if the valuation were to remain constant, then the increase is gonna be driven by how much our budget increase is. So I think to Councilor Cowan's point, you've mentioned this several times, so rounded off, your target here is to reduce, in effect, reduce expenses by $1 million.
But I want to just cut, before we move on and disregard my point. If we don't reevaluate, it's going to be spread fairly across all taxpayers, whatever we increase the budget, because everyone's going to pay the same mill rate. Whereas opposed to if we revalue one class of property, that falls on them.
That's the market adjustment. So
Correct.
so-
If we're gonna
so-
reevaluate everything and do a reval, then let's do a reval and have it affect everybody. But to just go and this year we're gonna whack homeowners, that's not fair.
Well, right now, just like make one point. Right now, we do not know what the valuation's going to be, and we're not going to have those numbers until after this budget is over, just like every other budget year, correct? Council Whiting?
I just wanted to defend the assessing department. They look at standards, and when you find that a particular class of properties, they told us this, if they're out of whack, they're required to bring them into balance. The balancing of these different classes actually brings fairness and equity to all the classes. It's not penalizing anybody.
I think Councilor...
I understand the process. And I don't appreciate getting talked down as if I don't understand the process. I understand the process, and I understand what the assessing department is trying to do. I'm saying that it's the second year in a row, the third year, we revalued, we reassessed, and if anybody is sitting here thinking that the cost, that the valuation of property is not going to go up, really? They're not living in today's world then, because the value of property's off the charts.
Can I make
Hey.
one quick comment? My
Sure.
understanding, Councilor Milks, is that the only way to end the market adjustments are to support a revaluation. Because if we don't do a revaluation, market adjustments, and I agree with you, they're not equitable, right? It's a blanket, this group pays whatever percent more. It's not fair, it's not equitable. But my understanding is that will continue and possibly accelerate if we do not support a revaluation. I don't understand the exact nuances of the revaluation, but from how it was presented to me, that's my understanding.
So I would be in favor of, that's what we're gonna do, a revaluation, but we don't, this particular position doesn't have to be a full-time for the rest of our life position. And until we do that, then I think we have to live with what our budget is, and if it's gonna be a tax increase, then it's fair to everybody. And I don't agree with assessing one group of property above others. If we can't come in and tell me what the commercial, show me how you come up with it, because I know there's a big company that I'm gonna say nameless that's got about $500 million in property development that they're doing out on Outer Hotel Road. It's a big number. Is that being evaluated?
So I think the challenge, your points are very well taken. The problem with the market rate adjustments is they don't happen all at once. As we've seen, as a manager, there were condos, and then Taylor Pond, and then there was the residential, the multifamily. And the problem is because there has to be enough data for the assessor's office to understand and drive this, and they don't happen in every year. So the way to level set that is to do the revaluation, do them all at once. It's more fair within the class, and it's more fair between the classes. To this position, we're on an annual budget here. It's for 1 year. We all understand the reevaluation is going to extend beyond a single year. We're not funding things out beyond those years. What we need to decide as we go down through these, as an example, this senior appraiser, is in this next year's budget, it's necessary, that type of work is necessary for the reevaluation. So we're going to fund that in some way as a head count, or we're going to be paying for those services through a contract with a revaluation firm. So I think it's fair to say that no position in the budget is forever, right? I think it's important if we're having a discussion about this and we say, well, our understanding is we're only putting this in the budget to do this reevaluation project. Down the road, 3 years from now, when the council's dealing with that, everybody knows that that was a temporary position.
That's fine. What I'm saying is, we're raising people's taxes. This budget is raising people's taxes, period. The school budget's raising people's taxes, this budget's raising people's taxes. Let's be fair about it then. Let's not, if we're gonna revalue the city, then let's revalue the city, but until then, let's make it fair. It's what it's what your tax rate is. We're raising your taxes by passing this budget. And let's not try and balance it more with one group or another because they happen to have, there's a market distortion causing real estate to go insane when people's salaries aren't going up in conjunction with it. So if that's how it is after the reval, then so be it. But let's accept that we're raising people's taxes and let's do it the way that it is, and let's then do a reval. And then we'll adjust it that way.
So,
That's what I'm saying.
yeah, so I think that's fine, and I think back to Councilor Cowan's point, and people can add or subtract from this number, but in round numbers, what Councilor Cowan is suggesting is that we find some way to reduce the manager's recommended budget by round numbers $1 million. And it might be helpful to have a number to work from, so I would suggest, based on our earlier revenue number, that $1 million we're looking for is, $500,000 or $600,000. It's not $1 million, because if we increase our estimate on the revenue sharing by $400,000 or $500,000, you take that off the $1 million. But the target, I think, that Councilor Cowan's suggesting is $500,000 or $600,000 in reduction, and things within the budget, including these two groups of positions, are potentially on the table for discussion. And I hear Councilor Milks's priority would be to, in some way, include the detective and the police officer as his priority of those lists. Is that correct?
Yeah, if I was to pick, if we're not gonna just cut that, if we're not
Well,
gonna
we may
just
cut
that
other
pos-
ones on there, but for that whole list of positions, those would be
then
your top
I would pick
priority.
the detective over the senior appraiser, that's for certain.
Do other councilors have suggestions about these two groups of positions as far as priorities, ones they think should be in the budget, shouldn't be in the budget? Councilor Walker?
Well, I disagree with the detective because it's not one that we have there. It's a new position. And I think the manager knows more about how we're running that department than what we are sitting here saying we should have one. I've watched the PACE team that's out there, and that PACE team has done more in the last month than any detective would do sitting up there in that office. So, and we've had 2 people working with that PACE team, and I give them, I would let them work 24 hours a day to see the stuff that they're doing in this city. So, detectives, they're more of the desktop guy and the smarter guy, not the guy on the road getting the work done that we need done. So, I agree with having them on the road. I think we need more on the road. So I don't agree with spending that money on that detective. The other thing is, there are some other spots there, the software tech there, I'm not positive that we need to fund that again, but using the ARPA fund, I guess that's okay if that's the way we do it. I want to talk about the fund balance. Myself and Belinda, we've been around here for a long time. We've seen the fund balance go all the way down to 7 million when it's supposed to be at 14. And we brought it back. We've done it over the years. It's not easy to bring back, but sometimes you have to go into that fund balance and you have to take that chance. And I'm sure that you're right about it being at 16 million, probably closer to 17 before we're done.
16.2%.
Okay, if that money is there, I don't see us having any problem with bringing it down to exactly where it belongs. And if we had to go 1 point below that, I would be in favor of doing that because that money's there and that can save our budget. It may be a cliff that we've got, but we've come back from that cliff 2 or 3 times in the past, and we've never really been hurt by it yet.
So just so everyone has the same information, my understanding is we're slightly below the 14% now after the appropriations that were made earlier this year.
Slightly
Yeah,
above.
Well,
Not counting so there's, right.
It's multiple years.
There's multiple years. So as of FY '22, we're slightly below the 14%. We're waiting for the audit to be completed on FY '23. We expect that will then be increased by $3.3 million. It will bring us up to the 16%. So potentially, we've had some recent discussions about possible use of fund balance money, but potentially we could stay at the 14%, which is by our ordinance, which is the targeted top end of that. So there are monies available there potentially. I think that perhaps, Council Walker has a good point. Perhaps what we should do is think about what we want to add in or reduce, and if we're not there, then we can circle back and look at potential. I think what you're suggesting is more than the 1.5 million that's in there now, and potentially using some fund balance money.
And-
Council Count.
If I may, so that I'm understanding kind of long-term, how often are we in a scenario where we're carrying over such a substantial carryover of past year's salary increase? How often does that happen?
last year's salary increases?
It's not,
Oh,
it's not,
it-
ju-
Yeah.
how often are we accruing that level of fund balance each year?
No. How often are we carrying over a scenario where we're, because I think the biggest driver in this really high, which I think it won't be accepted by the populace. We can't give a 13% increase. I think the biggest driver is the fact that just the timing of the union contracts, and that we're carrying over 2 years for a number of our large portion. I'm just wondering, how often does that happen, and how many years might we have to kind of cut back on fund balance in the future, so we're kind of leveling out the burden, the tax burden over time?
Yeah, great question. I think I don't recall us ever having all the contracts in my history all at once the way that we have now. And even some of the contracts that we had already negotiated, they came back as wage reopeners because of what the market was doing. So those contracts were already settled, already in place. However, the wage reopener kicked in that additional amount, and that's particularly true on one of the units anyway.
And going forward, they'll be staggered. It's just that in this particular year, some of the wage reopeners happened that caused this.
Yeah, we typically have about 3 that we bring forward throughout a year. But that varies too, because we might have a unit that's just gonna do a 1-year agreement. We're not gonna be able to get them beyond the 1. Others will do a 1 plus a 3, because it may have taken us almost a whole year to negotiate a contract. So then that throws them off track as well. But typically it's around 3 a year that you'll do of the 7, right? And so, because some might be catching up or wherever we might be within them. So, and then you're gonna have some years where you're not gonna do any, so.
So that gets to Councilor Walker's point, and I guess where I don't, and the reason I was throwing out that close to $1 million is really to try to get to 6.5. That was the target I was going for, is that that seemed, the overall tax levy of an increase of 6.5, that's still a substantial increase when we're talking about the combined budget. But I don't see how we would not be cutting substantial service, big dent in our services, without, if we start cutting into that. So I think we still probably have to look at both, but it's hard. We have great services in the city, and it's just, we're talking people, we're going to have to cut.
Councilor Gary?
Boy, I don't know what happened. Thank you, Mr. What I recommend out of the CIP, not bonding for some of the big Tonka toys or other things, as many or as much as we have. I know that we won't be saving the whole amount of money, but we'd be saving whatever we would have to bond as an interest payment or whatever we pay to pay off what we've bonded for. And then as much as the good Council Milks wants his positions, the only thing I can see is cut the new positions, or at least hold them at least till this next budget year. In regards to the reevaluation, the good Council Walker had mentioned the fact that we hadn't done one for quite a while. I was on the council when we did it. It was such a huge hurdle and cross for our constituents, our homeowners and taxpayers, that we had to phase it in over a couple of years in order to make it more palatable. It wasn't the best solution, but it was the only thing we could do at the time. So if we do the evaluation, and it is going to be a hardship, we too, at that point in time, that council can phase it in.
Councilor Whiting?
I have a few recommendations, just based on the difficulty of making big decisions on a few things. It's really, when you're budgeting, you have to do a lot of little things. And to me, number one is revenue sharing. We can bump that up. Number two, maybe we take some out of fund balance, maybe not as much as we'd like. And then three, I think we need to go through these positions. I think we need the GA eligibility coordinator, because we've had like a tripling of demand for general assistance. So we need to do that. I think in the senior appraiser, if we don't do that, we're going to pay more money to the company to do it, and then we can always reduce the staff through attrition. Somebody retires or goes to another job, you don't replace it. I think the three bottom items in the middle section, mechanics, those are going to be offset with reduction in, fire engine repairs. The equipment operators, that's offsetting the striping bid. And then the CIP, the Edward Little CIP manager, that's covered with new revenue from school. So, I think those are priorities.
I'm all right with I think Councilor Walker's right on the detective. I'm good without. And Mr. Manager certainly has a better understanding than I do. I just wouldn't. And Pace has been doing
Yeah.
a great job.
Yeah,
So I don't know how we can.
We're seeing what that will do, right? And as they move forward with that, but in that detective position was really a juvenile detective. We've been getting through. I think we'll look to continue getting through, but that was a juvenile detective, someone to just coordinate all those juvenile efforts. So, yeah, we can do that. So
let's take a 5-minute break here. So we've been at this a couple hours. We'll take a 5-minute break, and then we come back and work our way down through the list of these positions and see if we can finalize that.
We're ready, Mayor.
Okay, if we can reconvene. A few thoughts here, sort of to try to summarize where we're at. So, based on these previous numbers, if we moved the estimate for general revenue sharing to 7.2, that would bring it, would put on the books 450,000 of additional estimated revenue, right? That leaves us on the number we've been talking about here, $500,000 to find. That 500,000, depending on what happened with grab and go or homeless services, is not 500, it's 750. So my suggestion here, and we'll see what the sense of the council is that we're going to have some residual APRA funds. And my suggestion would be on grab and go that in the next couple of weeks, the manager is going to be coming forward with an updated accounting of APRA, and we look at potentially funding grab and go for an additional year through ARPA. That'll give us a chance to explore doing it in a different way than having the city directly providing the services. We can see if we can work out with a service provider. Regarding the homeless issues, I think everybody realizes we're going to be in this issue this coming fall. The challenge we have right now is we have no idea what it is that we'd actually be doing. So my suggestion there is that we handle that in the same way it was handled this year through the fund balance, because we're going to be way into the fall before we find out where we are. Gets us back to looking for $500,000. I think what we should then do is let's work down through these positions, get a sense of where the council is. Some of these have offsets in revenue. We can work through them, see what people think. The manager can give us his input about what the funding shift would look like. Then after we go through these potential new positions, we'll see what the effect of that is on the $500,000 and see, just back of the napkin, we're probably not going to get to the 500,000 from the position, but we'll see if we can make a dent in the 500, and then we'll see where else we have to look in the budget to close that gap. Does that sound reasonable?
Yeah, it does.
Okay, so the first one on the list is the GA eligibility coordinator. And the question I have here, based from my notes that I made when we talked about this before, this is shown as a new position, but it's a new position adding it on the budget, but it's something that I think the manager can verify this, that's going on today, because in order to meet our state mandated, for lack of a better term, turnaround time to process GA applications, we've had to go from 1 to 3 people when we jumped from 200,000 and change to 900,000 and change in services that we had to provide. So
Yeah, and like I said earlier, that's really the 2 positions. I should have added that second one. That's that one that the CDBG actually shifted their funding. So as the mayor just said, 1 to 3 is where we're going to. And to meet those state mandates, this is what it takes. We have, with the amount of volume that we have coming in on a regular basis, to meet that demand, it's going to require this. In comparison, if you take a look at other municipalities, we're below. Our team does a good job of kind of meeting that need, but we're still staffing below other GA offices.
And just so I understand, the GA eligibility coordinator, that's actually only costing us 30% of that number.
No, they're
right?
not.
Oh, that's not
Yeah.
labor's not reimbursed. Sorry.
I wish I could have told you they were going to cover that.
we tried, but we couldn't get
90%.
them to reimburse admin. Councilor Geary.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I was on this topic, the new Mainer's position. I know it's an important position because we need to be able to interact with people, interpret stuff. Is that a full-time position? And if it's sort of not, is there any way we might be able to share that person with Lewiston or share Lewiston's with ours.
The new
Here.
mayor, I have a DEI position. Is that what you're referring to? I don't have a new mayor position.
I thought there was one that deals with providing services, interpretation.
So
I'm
that's a
sorry if that's
position
wrong.
that's currently co-locating with CDBG. That might be what you're referring to. A position that's co-locating, that's providing services but being paid for by another organization.
Okay, I was just trying to figure out if we,
Am I missing that?
Well, I was gonna say, if you look at the department's presentation, their tab, they do have that broken out. So if it's off to the left-hand side, that's a contracted service that's co-locating share. It's not part of their salary line. So it's what's in that box to the left is a contracted service. I believe that one is in that box, but you can double check that. You have that in front of you.
thank you.
Other questions on this GA coordinator? What's the sense of the council? Is it to keep this, cut this?
We don't have any choice. We
Okay, we had some discussion earlier about to move on to the executive assistant. This is an additional position in finance. Thoughts council has on this position?
I just want to clarify, it's an executive assistant in part because you've combined teams?
So there
Knowledge
is,
department.
yeah, so the intent, and we'll circle back with this one. I think we'll continue looking at this as we evaluate needs. It's to bring more of a coordinated efficiency to meeting the needs of the people that are coming in on a regular basis, as well as Kelsey had talked about before, was, you know, when you have some services that take somebody away from the counter, and the moment you do that, they're working through, say, Hart Transportation, right? If they have all their trucks that come through to registry, they're not providing that service of the demand. The amount of people coming in, the volume of people coming in is a lot higher. So it allows that person to do that back office work rather than right in the front. You know, Kelsey and I talked about it. You know, obviously, if we're looking at eliminating positions, we should eliminate this one before we eliminate a position where we have somebody sitting in it right now. So.
Thank you.
Okay, senior appraiser position, and I guess we talked about this some, but the question to the manager, so this is in here for a full year, and I guess the first question is, when do we anticipate the reevaluation starting? I'm assuming it's in this coming budget year.
So this position would be doing a great deal of the prep work leading up to that. The getting a bid together, contracting out would probably be towards the end of this fiscal year to get somebody on board. But it's about their timeline of when they could start. So I'm not 100% sure of when, but I can tell you that they'll be doing a lot of that prep work leading up to it. That's currently, it's all the field work. There's a lot of field work that has to take place, and doing those, you know, 1 out of 4 ratios that they have to do, and I'm probably getting that wrong, but, you know, it's those ratios that they have to do to actually being out inspecting on site. It's that work. So that means that work would then shift over to that contracted service work. So when we go out to bid, it would be, none of that work is done. Add that to your cost when you provide us a price.
So if what I'm hearing you saying is, if we're gonna do a reevaluation, that cost is a wash at best, assuming that the hours that
Yeah.
senior appraiser would provide, that it's the same rate from the contractor.
Yeah,
But
you're-
it's likely the contractor will be more.
Probably more, yeah. But yeah, it would be tough to nail that, but I would say it's a wash.
Question on the title, senior appraiser. To me, that would be one of the high-ups in the office instead of just an appraiser that does the legwork.
The skill set that we would need for that position to do that work would be at that level. It's somebody that's more of a, I think they have 4 or 5 certifications. It's probably someone in that mid-certification level. We have an individual that's in that position now that just, I think, got her level 1 certification. So that's but the work that we would be needing for that would be somebody at a higher level. So we would select somebody that has that skill set already coming in and already certified.
And then, just on the same thing, sorry. One of the office staff people is supposedly retiring, and how are you going to handle that staff replacement?
Well, the goal is that, we're always looking at succession planning. And so, when you're when we get through the full reval, I don't have a date for that position of becoming vacant at this point, but I know it's gonna be in close proximity probably to after this work is done definitely within a couple years, we're probably looking at it. So that's why bringing somebody at this level allows for that succession planning in the future.
Council Platt.
Yeah, relative to the senior appraiser two-part question, how conservative is the $500,000 a year budgeted for the reval? Is that based on an actual bid that has come out, or is that just best case scenario? And then second part, can the senior appraiser have any effect to reduce that cost by them just being incredible at their job?
Yeah, it could definitely help reduce that cost. I think there's a lot of variables with it. I think we're giving a very conservative number, I think. If we take a look at what some of the other communities are doing, they are doing a very different reval. And so we'd have to talk about that. Would you want that type of reval to be done for the city? And so they might be bringing that number in lower. And, but, for one community, there's about 5, maybe 6 people in the assessor's office. And so it's hard to look at that bid price because they have 6 people that are doing some of that work that's offsetting that contract, just like what we would be doing here. That contract amount would be reduced because of that. So, but I think, Karen certainly is in that, world of talking with other municipalities regarding reval, and there's a lot of communities that are out doing their revals right now or are just completing. So I think we feel pretty good with that. I think it'll be less, but I think we're in the ballpark anyway, within a few $100,000 probably.
What's the sense of the council on this?
If I'm understanding correctly, if the dollar values are a wash, if we hire versus we pay more for the contract, the advantage here is that we have someone that's becoming part of a team, and then there's when others leave, so there's a value to that. Given that, I'm now leaning away from saying let's just do a one-time pay more to the contract and say it's probably worth hiring. But.
Yeah,
Councilor.
I agree. I think preparing, being ready to go out and do the reval is a lot smarter than going into it, without knowing enough about our city.
Yeah, after talking about it, I'm in support of that position. It seems like the money's a wash, but furthermore, I think an in-house senior appraiser could affect some efficiencies with the contract, possibly. I know that's not a foregone conclusion, but not doing that, you would not see a contracted appraiser bring you discounts in your contract price,
Yeah.
I wouldn't imagine.
Yeah, Kelsey and I can speak with the city assessor to talk about the amount that we have in CIP, whether or not we feel comfortable reducing that in year one and see what that might look like. So we can talk with her about, because if we're thinking we're going to come in around that $1 million range, right? Or if it's somewhere's within there, then there's some room for us to be able to chunk that out over the next 3 years a little differently. And so that could help us as well.
We're also working through the request for a proposal right now, so we should have more concrete numbers based on the responses we get in the next couple of months. We just don't have them at this moment, but we can have
Yeah.
those discussions, but we should have some more concrete numbers fairly soon.
Same question for the comp plan as well, just about the cost of the comp plan. I think it's the same questions.
Yep. Yep.
Councilor Gary.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Out of curiosity, I know it's early yet, but what is the current sort of rate for the consumer price index?
For this year?
Yeah. Well,
It's so far this calendar year, it's probably running 3.5% or so.
Yeah, I think it was 3.4 as of December, the way that the ordinance reads. So as of that December full year review average, it was 3.4, 3.7. I don't have it right in front of me. I had it the other night, but so that's where we're at.
So year ending, you have to think about this
Calendar.
in a way that our costs are kind of a tail on the inflation rate, right? It's not the same year. It kind of follows a year. So 2022 is 7.43, 2023 4.13. We've only got 2 months this year, but it's running 3.25, 3.5, something like that.
Yeah, over the last 2 years, remember, it was 12%, so. Yeah,
Okay, so let's move on. The software tech, and this is a currently staffed position funded with ARPA funds, and I guess the question for the manager is, so there's two questions I guess I would have. If we eliminate this position, we wouldn't be eliminating the full amount because we'd have a layoff situation, we have a cost associated with that. And the second is, what's the impact if we eliminate that? Because
yeah.
my understanding when they had the department presentations, or my recollection was that this position was added because a number of new software platforms were introduced to introduce efficiencies to hold down escalating costs by applying more technology. So what's the offset for a layoff, and what's the impact if we don't have this?
Yeah, I think they're substantial. So we're about ready to go live on SmartGov, which is the replacement of EnterGov. So that's the online portal planning, permitting software system.
Licensing as well.
Licensing as well. So that's a full operation. So this position, this person handles all of the help tickets when it comes to these applications, and will also be handling all the citizen requests for assistance on these portals as well. Munis is the same piece. So I talked before about what a great opportunity we have that the school department is moving on to Munis. This person is our Munis person that would be the one assisting the school with making sure we're bridging those two software systems. This position is so much needed that I would recommend if it comes down to it, I'll look somewhere else within the department, within the city, because that's how valuable this position is. It's one where there's other positions we would need to look at, but this position, I would say, we really do have to keep this position. We've brought on not only, so I only mentioned those two systems, but we also have our asset management system that also just rolled out, and this person is also managing that. And so there's a lot of systems, and then each department rather has different applications, software applications. The PD uses them greatly on numerous ones. This is the person that runs and makes sure that what we had in the past within the city without having a person here is that we had software applications that they could do a lot more for us, and we didn't have anybody managing them, and they weren't turning on different parts of the suite, I guess you could say, on these software applications, which was a miss for us. The other piece is not having somebody over them. All the updates on all those, we're getting to the point where if we were trying to update something, the whole system would end up crashing because the fact that you're 10 or so updates behind. And so this person ensures that all that takes place. Since we've moved to this, we've had just tremendous success with our software systems. So I would really look for something. If you're like, hey, this is the email, go find it, I'll go find it. But I really would struggle losing that position.
Council Mills?
What happens if that person leaves?
On their own? Or
Yes,
we would have to hire somebody in that position.
right. So, we have 4 people in that department?
We have
Or
4.
5? 4?
Yep.
And there's other 3. So we have 4 people. One is this person, that's critical. And the other three?
Yeah, they keep the network, they keep the network system, cybersecurity. Think about every facility that we have, that we tie into. That's really what that individual does as well. That's Brian, who you used to see here. So yeah, to ensure the security of our network, we're probably under, so one thing that I have in here, we're gonna talk about doing a workload assessment evaluation. I think we've been talking about that for quite some time, so I have that factored in. I think we need to contract that out. We're gonna see where we are with certain departments, and I think this will help. You'll see where we're probably understaffed in certain areas.
How
Yeah,
many?
That would help.
Yeah, those 4 supporting how many people?
Well, I would say
Jen.
240, but it's greater than that, 260, because it's greater than that, because they're also supporting, we provide service to the airport now, we provide service to the schools, so there's a lot more than that, but definitely 260 employees.
Yeah, so having spent the last 15 years in the software business, no place in the private sector would you find 4 people supporting somebody like that. I mean, it wouldn't
Yeah,
happen.
that's why I said I would have to look somewhere else first.
And as a follow-up question to that, now, I think it's great that we're working cooperatively with the school department, but if this person or other people in IT are supporting the school department, are they providing revenue out of the school budget like we do for the maintenance and those things?
I think the goal here is to try, well, we have different systems, but the goal here is to get the school system up to a point where it reduces the workload that's being driven through finance right now on tying together every month they're trying to tie in all the numbers. So I don't see it long-term. I see it initially just to get them up and running, because our team has the skill set with Munis to be able to help do that. I mean, Kelsey is probably one of our top with, individuals with knowledge of Munis that's going to help that process as well. So I see us probably not doing it long-term.
Any other questions on the software tech position? The next one is the non-sworn civilian. This is in the police department, and this is the offset to take back-end office work off of police officers to keep them on the streets. Any questions about this one?
Fully support.
The next one in this top block is the officer. This is on the PACE team. While they do varied things, this one is the PACE team focused on traffic safety. And this is 6 months in this budget year. Any questions on this one? Kind of the next block, here there'll be a potential financial offset on these as well. So the city planner, we talked about this, and I think Council Platts, you have some questions about this, as with the GA coordinator.
Very similar questions to, GA coordinator, I guess. City Range Law, what's the delay in hiring this person until we actually begin the comp plan process? And then the similar question was just about $400,000 a year. I assume that's a conservative amount to be budgeted for comp plan, or did I see that right? Was it 400 a year?
Got it right here, hold on.
But I guess similar questions. What effect does this position have on the process and the efficiency of the process?
Yeah, I think this, for tasks that we're talking about with a full comp plan, my recommendation was to delay the hiring on this so that we have this individual in place about the same time that you appoint committee members. So that now we have somebody that's now ready to assist in that coordination of that effort. It will impact the contract amount, because every time that you have a public process with the comp plan, if you're bringing that contractor in, you have added cost. The moment as much public engagement that you decide to have will expand that cost. if you had somebody in this position, they would be coordinating the majority of that public process, so you would not need to contract that out. I think this is the same way. We could probably actually look at reducing that amount within CIP to help offset that. Because I think we'd see some savings within that. And that, just so you, that number came in through the planning department. My number came in through me kind of directing Eric to add that position. So we haven't really offset those two amounts, but we could do that.
Questions about this, Council Gary?
Thank you. When do you think that we will be starting the comp plan?
Yeah, that's up to the council, but my thought was that you'd be ready to go by fall. So that gives you a good, we get budget done, that gives you June, July, August to do your recruitment of individuals that would put it out to the community to be part of that. And then we would try to do a launch by fall if that's where council feels we need to be.
Yeah, you also have the RFP process for the consultant that you're going to use because you need somebody that has substantial knowledge of having done this before to guide your committee through this. So no sooner than fall. It might be
Oh, yeah, no sooner
later
than
in the
fall, yeah. It might be late fall.
And how long of a process do you think it'll be? 6 months, 9 months?
No, I think your last time I was on, as a staff, as chief I was assigned to that. I think it was close to 18 months, so.
Yeah, I'd
Oh, well,
say that.
Counselor, yeah, you
normally
were
I
on
think
it.
18 months to 24 months.
I can address that. It took 18 months. It probably shouldn't have. It should have been closer to a year.
Yeah.
But we had a lot of discussions, including Lake Auburn, for example. So, and that was the beginning of discussions many, many years ago. But it could be 12 months. But the RFP, that's going to be a difficult thing because there just aren't the people. The company that did
Oh,
it
yeah.
for the city of Auburn, they're all retired now. Or at least a couple of the people may be working somewhere else, but the company itself I don't think it's in business anymore.
Yeah, I don't think they are, yeah.
Mr. Mayor, quick question. What are the negative repercussions if we delayed that process a full year?
You delay
The comp plan and the and the hiring of this person?
Well, I mean, I think, it's probably that same question that Councilor Milks asked, by law, what are we violating? You have, it puts us in a position where we don't have a comp plan that is validated, meaning we've extended that time. That can bring other challenges to work that the planning department's doing, that kind of makes us vulnerable in a way. And then I think that the timing is right now to move forward with that. I think delaying a year could be challenging. We could, but I think that it's a good opportunity right now as we look at the direction of the city to go ahead and move forward with that.
Thanks.
Any other thoughts on this position? What's the sense of the council on this?
I guess it kind of makes sense if we're gonna do the comp plan, because I hadn't thought of the public comment, I hadn't thought of the
Public engagement.
the amount of, the public engagement piece. That's a heavy lift.
Yeah.
In organizing that, so.
Yeah, and the team right now is they're stretched with, not just that team, but all the teams that are providing staff support for all the different committees right now. They're the ones that are trying to keep those groups informed, things done with that. So it would be a big stretch to try to make that happen. No, good.
So this next position is the Deputy Chief EMS, and this is non-tax revenue that, if I recall this correctly, we eliminated or are eliminating an EMS-related position and repurposing those grant funds to this position? Is that right?
So one thing with this EMS grant, and the fire chief had talked about this, You have very limited uses for it. It has to really tie it back into the EMS. You currently have a position that would be funded through the EMS grant. It's the EMS coordinator position currently. The thought is use those that's taxpayer dollars right now paying for that position. The recommendation here is here's a good opportunity for you to now take those dollars that are coming in, use them for that position, shift it to this EMS deputy chief's position. And by doing so, you now have, just like what the police chief talked about, is that you have such a young workforce, someone to manage those trainings for the paramedic licensing and their advanced EMT licensing. This is what that position will be doing. The goal would be that through, this grant, we're pretty certain we're going to see it for the next 3 years. The goal would then be, how are we doing with our other funding when it comes through EMS revenue, that we're paying for that completely through that EMS revenue increases moving forward in the future.
So in this budget, in your recommended budget already, is the decrease in the city tax side by
Yes.
eliminating the current EMS position and switching that over to this grant-funded?
That's correct. Yep.
Questions about this EMS?
So there's probably a little bit of an increase based on this,
You're seeing a
a
small,
little bit increase, but okay. It's not the full number that we're looking at here.
it's not the full.
Right, this is for half a year.
The position it's offsetting isn't the same
That's correct.
salary level as this one, but, so it's,
Yeah, that's a good point.
Yep.
Okay, the next one is the mechanics. These, this is the offset by the reduction in outsourcing fire vehicle repairs and adding a person to do that. It was projected to be a lower cost, and Mr. Manager, I'm assuming that the reduction in the professional services for outsourcing, that's already been taken into account in your budget.
It has.
So if we don't fund this, we'll actually increase the budget. If we weren't to include this, the budget would go up because we'd have to restore the funding for the outside maintenance of the fire vehicles. Is that correct?
Yeah, I can get you the amount. I'm just
assuming
looking
we
at their
can
budget.
find somebody to do it.
Assuming you can find somebody to contract it out to.
Assuming we could find a mechanic.
There's a lot of variables there, but yes, finding a
The
mechanic is
goal
another
is to try and
challenge.
find a mechanic that
That's
can
right.
do this. In the meanwhile, we're outsourcing. In which, if I remember correctly, the fire chief said that those contractors, the places that do it, are becoming less, fewer,
Yeah,
and
they
they're
don't-
more expensive.
And they don't turn the equipment around in a timely manner.
So, I mean, it's a no-brainer to me that if, again, we might have to pay through the nose for the mechanic, but it's gonna be worth it. We can get that stuff in-housed.
Other question?
You don't have equipment laying, inactive because it's waiting on repairs.
I would guess that that's $25 an hour, that's probably low to find a mechanic that could be able to do that high-end stuff.
Yeah, so the mechanics, they did in this last year's budget was that they separated from the Public Works unit, and they created their own union. And doing that, that has helped us be able to address the market need for bringing a mechanic in, because before they would have to be funded under the PW contract side at an equipment operator level, which wasn't the same skill set. And so, so that has helped us to be able to. A little more. We're still losing. We're still, so, I think the most recent one just left and went to DOT. I can't compare with that. And so, but we'll continue seeking it and bringing it.
You can't get your oil change in your car for the price we're paying these people.
Yeah. Yeah. So right now, we're paying between $110 and $140 an hour for that service.
The next positions, it's 3 equipment operator 2s. This is the offset. If I recall correctly, the striping's about $160,000 a year. Is that correct? For the
I
contract?
think it was 120,
120.
127.
And so this is, this is very much reduced because it's only for a very short part of the year to stand them up for the next year's
Yeah.
striping
Yeah,
contract, correct?
so the contract, you're not seeing that change in the contract in this year, you'll see it in FY '26. But to bring them in allows them to get in that position to be able to do that at the end of this budget year. That makes sense.
So the benefit to these are it's less expensive than the striping contract, plus they're going to backfill plowing when you can't stripe in the winter, correct?
That's correct.
Council Whiting?
And additionally, we will probably get striping done more frequently, you know, so that some of these faded crosswalks that are dangerous won't reach that state because we're waiting on a contractor to do it. We've got staff to do it.
So people can save their suspensions?
Yeah, and then, you know, the other challenge we had 2 years ago was that we had them contracted, they came, they basically were out the first night and then they walked. And then you're not going to get in the cycle with another contractor because they've all already taken their jobs. I mean, Auburn's a big job for any contractor to take on. When you take a look at the amount of crosswalks, turn signals, turning lanes that we have to actually do the handwork on.
Other questions on this?
I just want to make sure I'm understanding. So the 37 plus 75, that's just for this year. Next year, it'll be fully offset from that contract.
So it'll be like probably 3 or 4 times that number, right? 3 or 4 times that number, Phil?
Yeah. Yes.
Mr. Manager?
But that's up against $160,000 contract price, is that right?
120.
120?
I think 120, and I'll look, because I think I think some of you saw, I think the mayor did, I think Council Walker had seen that RFP, the bid amounts that came in. Once that team is in place, we'll be looking at, okay, what other things could we maybe pull in for that group to actually do some of the work? Obviously, the lane striping, we would stay away from, so.
And at least the other side of it is plowing. I mean, that would add valuable staff to the plowing side of this, because I was able to go out with them last storm, and they were running. They were going out long shifts. So 3 additional people on the plowing side could really, really help out Public Works.
And to follow up on that, I think I recall in the presentation it was over 15% an increase in overtime.
Yeah.
So that would address exactly what you're saying, that 3.
Yeah, so we would actually see that reduction in next year's budget.
That's why it took them a long time to get to my road. They were running. You're supposed to be driving the automobiles.
Any other questions on this one? The next position is the ELHS CIP manager, and this is fully covered by revenue coming in from the school side.
Yes, it's part of the MOU with the school.
Any questions about this one?
You're making money on this one, so you have extra revenue that's coming in that's just offsetting some of our other staff, assistants probably, and so. Yeah, so, well, yeah, I say making, means that what we're bringing in for revenue is greater than what this position's amount is. So we're just helping some of the other work that the city's doing as far as providing that maintenance piece for schools.
Okay, so after that exercise for this target of $500,000, we're down to about 470 by eliminating that position. So thoughts councilors have about elsewhere in the budget from a service prioritization? Because looking at what we have that we can impact, you know, it's predominantly workforce. We can talk about the capital operating money. The manager's already reduced the intergovernmental, and the library's the other one that's on there. But in effect, on the city side, if we're going to find $450,000, unless we find, if people have places in here where they think there's operating expenses that can be reduced, otherwise we're into people, and you're talking about service reduction or elimination. Council Wise?
Yeah, when I was listening on my way back here, Councilor Platts had brought up one that could be looked into, which was about record restoration, and see if there's a potential savings there. Because if there's even $25,000, $30,000 that can be saved, that's a start. You know, we have another budget area that I would like to look into more and see, which is.
So record restoration's in the CIP, it's not in the department's request.
Right. So it would have no effect on this year's budget because the bonding, the interest would hit next year. But we can look at that when we get to the CIP. Go ahead, Councilor Wiseman, was there another area?
Yeah, I was trying to, maybe communications and engagement we can look into. I know previously the council or somebody was out fundraising significantly and had brought in major sponsors, and maybe that can offset some of the events and lower that cost. I think the budget was somewhere around $120,000. So maybe evaluating sponsors and seeing if we can have partnerships and trying to lower that amount down could save some a chunk of money.
Mr.
Are you
Manager?
talking about community events?
Yes, possibly.
So I
So-
think, I guess council can weigh in, but I think that right now, we have the person who was the downtown, earlier was the downtown coordinator, has moved into community engagement because they're managing these downtown events. And they bring in a lot of sponsorship now. So are you suggesting that, because it seems to me there's two areas here. If you're suggesting that they bring in more sponsorship and reduce the 120, or are you suggesting that we eliminate one of those three major events? That would cut it.
I'm just suggesting taking a look into it and seeing what options are available. Like you said, that we've, out of the 500,000 or so, we've only eliminated, 25,000? So we haven't done a really good job of looking into this. And all we've done is just the new positions. So, I mean, there's more than, obviously, I've heard the conversation as I was on my way back. So, you know, there's either we're going to cut positions or we're going to have to look into deeper into other areas in the budget. And that's possibly one area, but that's up to a discussion. And that requires us to start looking into these and really having a deep dive. And I think that's the only way we're going to look if we're going to really attack that 400,000.
Yes,
So-
I understand that, but what are you suggesting? The special events in the FY25 proposed budget is $120,000, and to move that number, one of two things would have to happen. Are you suggesting that community engagement, communication and community engagement finds more outside donations so that number could be reduced, or are you suggesting, to me, the only other way to reduce that is to eliminate an event?
If they could look to find more outside money funds than to reduce that amount, then that would be a start. I would rather not to cut some beloved events, but if we can find, if there's some more businesses that want to get involved in sponsorship that help reduce that cost, then that's great. I would hate to cut some beloved events that we got here. The Lobster Fest, and the New Year's Eve party are very well attended events, so I would hate to see those go, but it's something we need to take a look at because, as Councilor Milk said, this is going to translate on to expenses that taxpayers are going to have to do, and we gotta take a look at these things. So that's up to the council and going to look into some more.
Mr. Manager.
Yeah, so within the 1.5 million for TIF revenue, I have the 120,000 amount allocated for that TIF revenue. So that expense line item is covered through TIF funds currently. Again, it doesn't mean that you can't shift that to something else. It's just right now that's where that's allocated. We do have 50,000, additional 50,000 in sponsorships currently within the revenue line item. So if you look under general government on page 6, you'll see that 50,000 there. Doesn't mean that we can't, that the team can't look to increase that, maybe by 75,000. Increase it by 25,000 and say, all right, let's try to enhance what we're doing for community sponsorships that are coming in to help offset that. Yep.
From a budget perspective, yeah, we can do that, and we should. Look and see if we can increase it. But from a budget perspective, if we decrease this line, shift the TIF revenue elsewhere, the expectation would be that they get more sponsorships. If they don't, you're short. You can't run the event. Or
Yeah.
you got to cut something back in all of them or cut one of them out.
Yeah. So I guess what we could do is leave the 120 the way it is, and you could look to increase the event sponsorships by 25,000 in the revenue line item. That means that, and I've talked to Liz, who's our director there. She knows that just means their team is going to have to really take a look at what we could do with some of our community sponsorships, because some of those are where we felt a lot of those were multi-years and they're done. And so it's a matter of going back out to try to see if we can get them in multi-year again. But as the mayor said, if we did that, we'd have to find that 25,000 somewhere else.
I don't have all the answers. I'm just proposing, seeing areas that, and I see head shaking around in the room. So it's kind of putting the topic out there, and a community that works on it may come up with an answer or not, but at least it's out there for us to have a conversation about. So.
And I'd like to jump on board with you because I believe that most of these events are adult events as well. And I don't think we're doing a great service to the people that live in this community. Most of these events bring in, we'll say, 1,000 to 2,000 people from the outside. And that's not who I'm looking for our taxpayers to pay for. So I think when this budget started, some of us asked that we would see some other events that were more local, more for kids to be involved in, more that mothers are involved in. And most of these here are all have to do with alcohol, drinking, bands, and most kids are not out there until 10, 11 o'clock at night either. So I would like to see a change to this, and I think some of these, we are marketing way more money than we should be to put these events on. They should be more local and for local.
So I think that the budget amount that's in here isn't earmarked specifically to any event. So I think the council will have an opportunity within whatever budget's passed for special events, if they would like to alter what these events are, how many there are, what our target audience is. I think we'll have an opportunity to do that outside of the budget. Because Council Walker is correct. We did have a discussion about this, and I think there was a sense from the council that at least one of these events should be a lot more geared towards families than what's happening today. So is the sense of the council to increase the revenue line under sponsorship by 25,000 to go from 50 to 75,000 in the revenue estimate?
I'd personally rather decrease the budget by 25, the expenses, personally.
So I have that currently offset through TIF funds. So, yep.
But you said that you could potentially use those TIF funds somewhere else?
It's in something that you already have that you have budgeted. So, yeah.
Yeah, so you could do that. So, Councilor Platts, I guess it's the same question I had for Council Eisner. If we decrease it by 25,000, and we reallocate the 25,000 in TIF funds elsewhere, what are we cutting?
Nothing. You're not yeah, you'd have to,
You
have
can't
to
put
double
those
that,
three,
right? So-
you can't put those 3 events on if you reduce the budget in the same way you've been doing it, correct?
oh, yeah, definitely, when it came to that, no, I agree with you 100%. If you reduce that TIF amount, we would be allocating that to something that's already in the budget. So all you're doing is, you're just shifting that. You're not, you'd have to still find another if the number was 25, another 25 somewhere else.
But aren't you allocating it to something that then wouldn't need $25,000 of budgeted expense?
That TIF amount is the administrative TIF amount that's set up within the TIF allocations. So that revenue won't change, so.
But could that revenue be repurposed for an expense that's currently being covered by tax levy?
It would. However, when you allocate that, so if you were to, so I want to make sure I've got it right. So if we're looking to say, reduce the events by 25,000. So we could take that out, reduce it by that amount. That revenue, we could reassign somewhere else within the budget, someone else's, say, position by a certain percentage, right? We would make that shift, but we haven't increased the revenue side by doing that.
We've just decreased the expense side by 25,000 if you're supplanting property tax base expenses with the TIF. So I think to Council Platz's point, if we decrease the 120,000 down to 95,000, use that TIF money to offset something else, we've decreased our general fund expenses by 25,000, but the question then is, we're going back to community communication and community engagement and saying, what can you do for 95,000, which isn't going to be the same as what we had in the past.
Well, I guess to clarify, I would be okay saying that to them. I would be okay saying, you now have $95,000, not 125. What events would you like to, what are your top events? You're going to have to cut one.
Or go find $25,000 more from sponsorships.
Yeah, and I'd rather shift that back to you. The events that we have were directed by the council at that time. I would want you to do the same thing. Which events do you want? The team will put it on or not put it on, but I don't want staff have to make that determination of which events we're doing, the type of event. Those were already predetermined, and so if you're going to change that, like Council Walker had suggested, you do it at this level and you make a determination. Really, it's those 3 signature events. 2 of those signature events are daytime events. 1 is the nighttime event. And so, so it's really, it's your decision, so.
How much is the New Year's Auburn? In the total
I
revenue?
think it's in her presentation.
Total event cost 45,500. Offset by sponsors of just shy of 9,000. So they budgeted 50,000, didn't cost quite that much.
Cost $40,000.
So, but keep in mind, some of those sponsorships they've sponsored for 3 signature events. And so they're getting a package deal, so so we just need to know that before we go selling another package. What is it gonna be? So, yeah, because these events really, I wasn't sure exactly where Council Walker was. Council Walker, were you talking about 1,000 to 2,000 people from the outside, not necessarily Auburn residents coming? Because these are hitting somewhere around 3,000 plus probably.
And
So
there's
I-
local businesses benefit. There's a lot of benefit to these things. It's not, you can't just put a dollar amount. Gritty's is full, Lost Valley comes down and you got, yes, it's a lot of drinking, but they're local businesses, food and beverage. A lot of people enjoy them. We got food trucks and all that stuff. So there is a lot of business that comes in.
Sorry.
I agree with you 100%, but they made no choice to pick any other event except for what they had in here. And I know it was brought up, and I think they should have had the consideration to at least say, this will cost this if you want it. I want to talk about another event. You got the Auburn Community Band. We give them $5,000. That's great. That's less money than we would ever pay someone else to come in and do exactly what he does. Does the people across the bridge give any money towards that band?
All right.
But we do,
I don't
but
want to
we
say no.
do,
I don't
we
want to say no.
do
I'm
Great
sorry.
Falls, we do the Great Falls Balloon Festival, and we're willing to give $10,000, and you can't get them to do anything on this side of the bridge, and we've been doing this for years with them now. We should have cut it out a long time ago, and maybe they would have been working better with the city of Auburn. They do a terrible job working with us, and they have been, at least for the last 5 years, a terrible job, and I know COVID hurt them badly. Liberty Fest, 10,000 again. We could push that down to 5,000, and we would force them to do more work than what they do to bring in their budget.
I think you either fund it or you don't. I think that's the offset for the fireworks. That's what we contribute towards fireworks. Lewiston does the same in the match amount. I think either you do it or you don't do it, but I wouldn't suggest reducing it. Because you're not going to get any additional effort on those groups if that's reduced to do something on this side. We do work with them to try to pull it in, but the challenge is that it's, if you recall, I mean, the Balloon Festival used to be there, and then when it shifted over to Lewiston, we certainly had less things here. We have a lot of people that park here, and especially Auburn residents, and they'll walk the Riverwalk over, or they'll view it from our side of the river. But there's not a lot. They've done the stage over at Festival Plaza in the past. It's just not a great turnout. We don't see it, and so rather than stretching those resources, they just keep it all over there.
So for our purposes here, I might suggest that we talk about what the budget number is, either reducing the budget line or increasing the revenue. I just want to reiterate what the manager said, that communication and community engagement isn't deciding what any of these are. We're deciding what they are, and I don't think it needs to be done in this process. I think, Councilor Walker's got some very good points here. I think we ought to think about what the budget is, and then the council can have a more detailed discussion about the events. We can bring in the staff in a workshop and decide what events we want going forward, and it can very well be a change from the mix we have today.
Yeah, great point.
Because Counselor Walker's, we used to have a Christmas parade, and now we don't. I know my kids were in it. We don't do it anymore, but so, yeah, I'm in favor of less glitz, less glamour, and maybe a little more wholesome and, let the businesses figure out a way to generate excitement. If it was meant, if New Year's Auburn is a moneymaker, then people go out and let's make some money then.
I would propose kind of amending what Councilor Platts, how about we work with 25,000 reduction, but also put in a goal for 10,000 increased revenue if they can do it, and we'll offset, but
I would rather, if you're going to reduce, I'd rather see you just reduce the full amount because it's less to sell to sponsors. If you're not doing large-scale signature events, it's less to sell to them to try to sponsor. We can probably have more of that conversation later. I can certainly talk with the team, but I'm just thinking about what they're trying to sell. And if we're reducing, I would say just do the reduction.
And they'll sell as much as they can sell.
Yeah.
Right? The manager will,
Yeah.
work with that team. If they can exceed that budget
Yeah.
amount they have now, they'll exceed it. So what's the suggestion for the reduction on the 120 to what?
I'd kind of amend what Councilor Cowan said. I'm just looking at these line items. These three events have a total cost of $100,000, so maybe they've come in under budget. $30,000 of that's marketing. So $25,000, maybe is a lot to affect that budget, but I've thrown a lot of events myself. I think you could probably cut that marketing budget by a third or a half. I mean, these events are established. Maybe we're not trying to eviscerate this event budget this year, but maybe by asking them to shave $12,500 off of their marketing budget or $15,000, we're going to have to go through every department if we're going to find $900,000 or $600,000. So maybe a good solution here is just to identify a smaller amount than 25, look at just the marketing, because you can still throw an event. These are 3 and 5 year old events. You don't need to market them as hard. That would possibly be a suggestion.
Yeah. So I think we're it's 20 minutes of 9, and we're saying that we want 900,000 out of the budget. Is that what we're saying?
Oh, I thought we were at
think we're down to
470.
470.
470.
470. That's what we want to reduce the budget by.
Right.
So,
To get to that 6.5 that Counselor Cowan had thrown out there.
So can we ask the manager to find the $500,000 and cut it? And come back and tell us what he's done. Otherwise, we're going to be here till 2 o'clock in the morning at this rate, if we pull every single thing out.
Yeah, I think I think a better way to do this is for people to identify just general areas, not lines, because I agree with Counselor Milks. If we get 25,000 off this, you got to do this, another 15, 18 times. It's going to be a long haul. So are there areas? Think of it more in service areas, right? Then we can drill down into what particular service. But from a prioritization standpoint, are there services being provided? Because we're never going to get to 470 nickel and dime in this.
I mean, I got a question. You had mentioned earlier that you have a DEI person. What do they do?
So that's not within the budget, that's just a grant-funded position.
It's a grant fund.
Yeah.
Okay. Because I'm looking,
Yeah.
I'm like, where is that? That's not
Yeah.
a budget person? Okay.
So before we leave this, is there? I heard 25. I heard 12 and a half.
Let's
What
go
are we
with
talking about
100,000
reduction?
on top and just call it 20,000 cut and get your reaction from the team and let us know how unrealistic that is.
I'll go with 100. I'm sorry. Yeah, because
Go
I
with
think I think Counselor Platts is correct. There's some other pieces there, right? Because that marketing piece, you get the sponsors because you're saying you're going to have this many touch points with that marketing component so that you get the sponsorship dollars. So if we reduce that, that's fine. We can work that out. Really encourage the counselors to think about what you'd like to have for events. Maybe we're not doing any events. And this is not something we're going to continue with. Or it's going to be, we're going to do a couple family events and that's going to be it. And we can work through that. But I think we could do that at a later time. We'll have the funds there to be able to do something, right?
How much does it cost the National Night Out to put on their National Night event?
I'd have to get the number for you. I'm not sure. We have a lot of sponsors that do that. Rita's been doing it for 100 years, but I would say we probably do it for less than 20,000.
So
less than
let's
20.
set
And that's
aside
baked into the budget.
let's set aside the actual events, right? I've made the note here of reducing events by 20,000 or 100,000. We can have a whole work session and figure out how we want to spend that on various events going forward. So now we're down to 443.5. So think of this in a broader scale. The departments, are there programs, are there service provision that are the lowest priority for you? Because we're not going to get there doing this.
Could we, I'm not entirely answering your question directly, but could we look at setting a cap on salary increases of non-union employees? I feel like I saw a couple in here where maybe it's a one-person department, they're asking for a 12% salary raise or an 11% salary raise. I don't know if that person was union or not. I could have dug into it, but is that, I mean, I guess I'm looking for some feedback
probably-
and advice. Is that a bad thing to do?
That's probably
This-
multiple years. It is a bad thing to do, only because now your challenge is you're taking those non-union people saying, why would I want to move to one of those other positions if I'm now making less than the people I'm supervising?
And you're talking about the 12%, like we had talked about before. It's wrapping those increases that used to be relying on salary reserve now into that line. So it's not actually a 12% increase. It's looking like that because based on what was previously budgeted, which none of the previous increases were budgeted, it looks like 12. It's not really 12.
Even for
Correct,
non-union.
even for
And-
non-union. So really, let's say, I think last year was a 3% increase, which was not in the budget line. So it's not really 12, it's accumulation, 4%.
Yeah, and then you had we had moved from 37.5-hour work week to 40-hour work week. And so there was a lot of different variables in that.
So it's not that person asking for a 12% increase.
Yeah,
It's just
no.
a accumulation of
Yeah.
what's existing.
Great point.
Council Milt?
The LA Transit Authority is up 58 grand from, that's 458,000, that budget.
So we have a meeting on Wednesday to review the budget. If there's any more changes in that I can bring forward, I will. It's within the contract. I'm using some carryover money that we had available, and Kelsey and I will go through and see exactly if I've got that number correct. I
I'd
think
be
I do.
curious to know, do they have ridership numbers? How many,
They do.
how many rides a year do they do? And if you don't have it, that's
So-
okay.
Yeah,
Yeah.
we can provide all that.
'Cause I'd like to know how much it costs per ride.
I really encourage you to go on and take a look at the study that was done. You'll see where the ridership comes from, where they go, where they're generated. Remember, ridership numbers, though, are if I go from here, if I get picked up, say, at Barker Arms, and I go to Great Falls Station, that's one. I go from Great Falls Station now, and I'm going to another spot, that's two. To get to my final destination might be four counts within that. So it's hard to get a person count because that person might be hitting the ridership. And they have to count this by, the feds require that. That's why they document it the way they do.
To follow up on your question, this is contracted for the coming year already, correct? It's the last year of the contract?
So we are looking to extend the contract, but it allows for them for an increase within that contract. We did a 3-year fixed with a 1-year extension each year with their increases
So
in
this is
costs.
just the last option year?
This is the
basically?
last option year.
Right, so I think from the prior discussions, there's some limitations on what you can do in such a short period of time here for LATC going forward, but I think the whole conversation about transit and what we do after this option year is something we need to figure out over the coming year, because I think, and Council Cowan's on the committee and the manager's on the committee, it seems to me that there's not a high level of satisfaction for the service we're getting for the price we're paying at this point in time, and we need to revisit this, but it's very difficult to redo the transit system between now and July. We have no other alternative but the current provider, correct?
That's correct. Yeah, and I think the only number that we might come forward with is maybe a $10,000 reduction. That's if we take a look and really evaluate the security enhancements that we've done at the 2 locations because of our
The
unhoused
vandalism and-
population and the vandalism that's done there, all those things within Lewiston and Auburn at both stations. So we might have some reductions there, but it'll be very minimal. If we can come back with 10, we're doing well. So,
The public fire protection fee from Auburn Water District? Because I don't remember, I know that the city pays a very large number for the fire protection, but is that addition to that? This is an addition to the normal rate that you pay? How's that?
yeah,
I'm on page 27.
That's our fire hydrants.
Is that the
So-
service of the fire, the
It's-
hydrants themselves?
so that's the service, yeah, go ahead,
Okay.
Rick.
Isn't that a state mandated
formula?
like a PUC formula, I
It
think,
is.
so,
Okay.
yeah.
Yeah,
I don't remember
No.
seeing that in the budget before, so that's, yeah.
yeah. We might be breaking it out a little differently, where you might have just
Okay.
saw it as a utility before,
Yeah,
but
I
now
don't
it's actually
remember-
broken out by, this is what's driving that utility increase.
That's a pass-through of some sort from this,
Yeah.
it's mandatory, but then it's not.
Oh, yeah,
The fee
yeah.
that we're paying, that Auburn Water District is charging, that we could do a,
The only thing you could do is eliminate some fire hydrants.
Right.
Yep. Yep, no, that's a great point.
Mr. Mayor, to your question, I've honestly been struggling with which department is less valuable than others. But since we need to, I think if I had to put a value on it, I would say that the recreation is not, to me, as valuable as fire or police. However, their budget is a fraction of them, of those. So I really think that I would ask you, Mr. Manager, if you could give us recommendations on if maybe we come up with a set amount over the next few minutes of how much more. And a reminder that we could also, before that, just determine, is there an amount that people are comfortable with if we really did want to use the fund balance this year as an offset to that remaining 420,000?
Well, the council could decide to use the 450,000 now, but my own personal opinion, at this stage of the process, that's kind of an out. I think we ought to work this a little more. I think that, if the council thinks about this from a service reduction standpoint and absolutely says we're not going to reduce any more services, then I think we could talk about the fund balance. But before we get to that point, I think it's a matter of determining the public policy, right? We go to the manager, he'll come back and if you tell him, cut $450,000 out of this budget, he's going to come back and tell you where he's cutting $450,000. But then what's happening is the elected officials are deferring the public policy decisions to the manager. So I think before you get to that point, the council needs to give a little more direction about the areas they would like the manager to cut. And then if I think we should work towards this goal to get down to the 6.5%. If we can't, then we can talk about the fund balance.
That's I guess I would push back a little bit in that. Again, I'm pushing on the fund balance because I truly believe that carrying over such a large amount of double year income and salary increases, if it truly is a rare event, I see it more as a one-time gig or a way to at least allow us to use some of that reduced fund balance down the road. We can cut services, but it's because we weren't paying salary increases that were covered from wise financial management in previous years, and the ability for us to have a lower increase in the tax rate. I don't know. I mean, we can do that, but that's, that means that people are suddenly going to lose substantial services if we're talking 450,000, I think.
Or some portion of that, right? I think that, if the council looks at this and says, where we are right now, we don't want to cut any more services, we can then have a discussion about putting the 450 of the fund balance in to carry this thing forward. Your point's very valid about these increases that came from, it's just the way the budget happened, where they all came in those years, and it's carrying a large increase over. And
what's the abnormal increase of that? 1.8. And those that budget would normally be, what's that when it comes back, what's that normalized budget level gonna be? So it's 1.8 this year, what would it be?
I think you're typically would only see somewheres around, on a given year, probably around 700,000 in the salary increases. And we're at what,
So that's $1 million.
We're at 2.3. So,
Yeah, so the offset is about 700,000. We had
Yeah.
the 1.8 in extraordinary salary that was carried forward. You deduct that out of the 2.3, or 768,000,
Similar to
so
that.
it's
Yep.
around that.
And I'm not necessarily suggesting that we just tonight say the rest of the 450. I just think, I don't, I mean, I'm happy to, if I have to give you a call, I would reduce recreation before I reduce our essential services, which I consider police and fire to be the most important, and then Public Works is right there behind them in terms of what people feel they're buying for their value.
Mr. Mayor.
Yes.
Thank you. Next week, we have another workshop that will be going over this, correct? My kind of thought is that it's getting late. I mean, I'll stay here as long as we need to, because that's what I'm here for. But, there's a lot of tough decisions here that have to be made on a direction that we're going to be doing. And I mean, there's a lot of questions I've been asked of the manager on, that helps us making a decision on which way we're going to go. Can we look at having another week to get some thoughts, considerations, questions, and that way we can send them to the manager, and then he can get us back more information. That way we can do another deep dive into this, have a lot more information on the table, and for us to make a decision.
Yeah, I think that's fine. Just so everyone's aware, it's an hour and a half work session, budget work session, because it's prior to the city council, so it'll be 5:30 to 7. The manager will crunch whatever numbers you want, answer whatever questions you want. It would be helpful if people could give him some direction in what areas you want him to look for reductions. Council Wayne?
One thing I noticed when I was looking through the budget, all the departments have dues and subscriptions. And I know it's very boring, but the numbers add up. And there might be a way to ask department heads to look at some of these things and see if there's a way to, pull back on those. I'm not sure how much that would amount to, but it might be a few $1,000s.
And my thought is not to just defer the whole boat right over to the manager and say, hey, you go and you cut and come back to us. I think giving us the time to look through this again, do a deep dive into this, come up with what areas that we have some questions, and then we can send those questions off to the mayor, and he can get us back some numbers or get us back some information. That way we can take a look at this again and have a discussion. I mean, maybe it takes us that we need another workshop on top of us for have a discussion to do this.
I mean, I think we're at the point where it's people. So how many people do we want to cut? That's where we're
Well,
at. I mean, the fact, it is what it is.
Yeah.
I mean,
yeah.
that's where we're at. Are we gonna cut police, fire, public works, recreation? Because that's what we're at, right? That's it, layoffs if we want to cut.
yeah, I think that if you're looking to pull that full
We
amount,
can't eliminate the LA transit. That's what I'd pick.
yeah, right.
If you look at this, right, if you look at this sheet, I think this is helpful, right? Because the ones in the blue, you have little to no ability to affect. So I think Councilor Milks' point is following along with the discussion we've had tonight, which is workforce is a 2.368 increase. And so if you're gonna have 450, you're talking cutting 8, rounded off, 6, 8, 7 positions.
Yeah, certainly depending on where. I think that, part of that too is taking a look and saying, okay, we have a lot of overtime within our budgets, right? Some of them meet a minimum staffing level. Some of them exceed that, where you could take a look at, say, plowing. That's probably a good example. So winter maintenance overtime. The question, the level of service is where we're at, right? We're going to need X amount of drivers. You're not going to be able to eliminate that. But do you turn around, to Council Wajda's point of being out on the road, you saw that they were running, but do you say, okay, we're going to reduce our overtime amount by X amount of dollars, which means that we still have the same amount of trucks. However, we're not funding it at that overtime rate, so that when that storm gets to the point where we've seen them recently, means that you have less trucks out, which means your priority 4 roads might go to every, 7 hours rather than every 4.5 hours, wherever they're at right now on priority 4.
Yeah, or as we've seen recently with some of the stuff, sidewalks get deferred. They can't get to them because they're all tied up plowing.
Right.
But but whether it's in overtime or cutting actual positions, it's in the personal services line, and it's going to affect the services that are provided. So Counselor Cowens pointed out that his place to look would be in recreation. We can entertain others. To Council Wise, we have an hour and a half on the 16th. If the council doesn't think they're going to wrap up in an hour and a half and be ready to go to first reading, then we are probably looking at having the week of the 22nd another budget workshop, and potentially having to schedule a special meeting to make sure we can get this in a timely manner. The goal right now is to have this, we need to have this all completed by the 19th, unless we want to have a big disruption. I guess supposedly conceptually, maybe we could do the school part, get them on the ballot, but that would mean that the council would have to be quite solid on the 5% number for the school, that's not going to change depending on the, with the effect of the deliberations on the city side budget.
I would like to see us not, in a CIP, bond for as many big equipments, police cars. Because if I know if like we bond for a police car, it may be multiple year payments for it, but instead of allowing him to have 5 cars, let him have 4 cars. Or if we need one of those big trucks for public works, we just don't bond it this year. And we'll be saving whatever that bond payment would have been. So that would come back into your cutting down the money.
It wouldn't come in this year because the 1,438,268 is the increase in the debt service from the CIP that the council passed last year. So we'll have a CIP discussion and we can talk about those items that are in there. But regardless of what we do on the CIP, it's not going to affect this year's budget. It's going to affect next year's budget when the first interest payment comes due on that bond.
But if we don't put it in there, and when we pass the budget, when our financial director goes to issue bonds, it won't be in there, so she won't have to put that in there to, as a placeholder.
Yeah, you'll see
Yeah,
that in
that's
FY26.
true, but it won't affect this year's budget.
Right.
It won't affect the budget we're
That's right.
working on now.
Yeah.
The bond debt service increase is already set in here, and it was set by the CIP, the previous council authorized.
So what you had just suggested regarding vehicles, so in the manager's budget that I have recommended right now, it is reducing one of those cruisers down. That's in that 480,000. It has all vehicles that are being recommended in that line item rather than bonding. We wouldn't bond any of those type of vehicles. That's the cruisers, the battalion chief's vehicle, those types of vehicles. It's all within that operating level budget now instead of bonding. So that is exactly what's in here. And it does reduce the PD from what they requested down 1. And and you'll see that full CIP request, because like Public Works, I'm only recommending one piece of apparatus within of those, that list that they had, other than their regular trucks. But the specialized equipment, I'm only recommending one, and that's that vac truck. But you'll see all that on Monday night. What I'll also do on Monday night is, based on wherever we land today, I will make those adjustments in the manager's recommendation, because I have to get that to you before April 30th. So next Monday is my last meeting that I can get you the manager's budget. The changes you make now will be items that I'll put in that. And so you'll see those adjustments at least on Monday night. If there's more you come up with tonight, then I can make those adjustments now so that they'll be ready. Less, which would require less amendments for you moving forward.
Council Walker.
Yeah, I'd like to, when I was a superintendent a long time ago, we used to go through this budget, one line after the other line, and we'd have to make cuts, make cuts, make cuts. Sometimes you'd have to gamble, so I'm going to gamble with a few of these. These are what I'd like to tell you in Public Works. For instance, you got winter road maintenance. You increased it $39,000. I would say you put that 0 and you gamble with that. First of all, I don't believe we can even that number, just say it's 39,000. It could end up being 139,000 next year. We don't know because we can't predict weather. But I'd rather say we take it away than to leave it there. So that's 39,000. Then you got $13,000 increase in general. I would say that's 0, 13,000. Then you got $15,000 in tree removal. I would gamble with that one and say put it back to where it was, 0 increase. Then you got catch basins. You've almost doubled the price. I would cut that 25,000.
Counselor Walker, are you looking at the department request or the
I am,
manager?
department budget, yes.
Okay, so the manager has made some reductions to those
Well,
lines already?
he can
Just-
erase them or whatever
That's fine, I just
after,
wanted
but-
to,
So-
wanted you to know that there are some that are already reduced based on the numbers you're saying.
Okay,
So-
road
well,
salt, I'm saying there's an increase of 47.
Yeah, if we work, I think it's page 25, is that right, Kelsey?
26 I'm on now.
Page 25 of the master list is Public
Is
Works.
where it starts, and that's what you're working on,
Yep.
Council Walker? Okay,
Yep.
proceed, thank you.
All right, the road salt, I would bring that back to 0. The others, I'm not sure what that others consist of, but you've increased it to 34. I would bring that back to at least half because I get an idea you're going to tell me a lot of little things are in that number. And
I just want to make sure I
repair,
have the right line number on that one. Which one is that? There's a lot of other supplies.
MV supply, other.
Oh, MV supply. I'm sorry, I missed that. Okay.
And then you got repair to buildings, I would cut 25,000, and then you got the vehicles underneath, I would cut 25,000. That's just in that, all right, that's just in that one department. I haven't gone through every other department, but that's a start of, how much total, I'm not sure. It's gonna be at least $200,000.
So the repairs vehicle, that's because we've collapsed those from all the other departments. So,
I understand that, that's why I said we'd cut 25,000, and
okay.
you gotta tell them to be very careful.
So I got the repairs vehicle. What was the last one? Building, right? Repairs building, 25. Repairs vehicle, 25.
You want to throw the $5,000 for repairs equipment on top of that too, Leroy?
If you want to, go ahead.
And Leckate, Holden, Leachate,
Can't change that. That's just that's a contract.
Them are just,
we got a lot of solid waste disposal.
I think we gotta take a big look at that, all the way around, recycling all of it.
Mr. Mayor?
That's all contracted, correct?
That'll be your contracted amount for this upcoming year.
Question, the emergency reserve, am I remembering correctly, that was your recommended amount to put in under the fiscal services? I'm looking page 10,
550.
the 550.
It's a percentage.
So perhaps we lower it to 500?
It's a percentage, so your emergency reserve has to be a percentage.
Percentage of, gotcha, I'm sorry.
So, yep. It's within the ballpark. I think, because I don't know what your actual, where you're gonna land, so I think it's pretty close to where we need to be. It's at 4%.
If I may, one thing I'm struggling with is, it's related to overtime. Am I understanding certain departments where it's more mandatory overtime where
So-
versus we have some control?
Yeah, there's, so the only one that's contractual is fire. Police, it's, we try to use some flexibility depending on the time of day where what we might reduce down. Policy, though, dictates it. Fire, it's per apparatus. So if you go below the minimum staffing, which is 14 firefighters, we have 16 scheduled per shift. If you go below that, then you would have, if you didn't replace, you'd have to take a fire engine out of service. So that's what's, so that is a contractual piece. PW, it's not contractual. It's really the level of service that we talked about before, which means, so those are those policy decisions, right? Like the mayor said, if, as a result of our conversations and the budget discussions, we make those reductions regarding overtime for public, for winter operations maintenance that Councilor Walker suggested. It just means when it comes time to wintertime, you know, if you're getting calls regarding sidewalks not being done, that's why we will make sure that we focus all of our efforts on the sidewalks that are directly related to school walking routes to make sure those are done. But that means the downtown might not be done. It might be some other areas. So it's just keeping those in mind, because I can't go and peel somebody off from something else to go and clean up a sidewalk somewhere just because they've got other priorities. But those are all manageable. But it just means that's that policy decision that the mayor was referring to, which means you've already set that policy. That means that next winter operations will look different because you won't have that additional overtime to cover those additional service needs.
I agree with Councilor Walker's cuts.
Okay,
That-
I've got those.
that
I
he-
think
yeah.
everybody seems to be.
Also be in favor of a fund balance transfer to, in some way, counter that strange, once-in-a-lifetime increase in wages. If we, because that's a once,
Yeah, I think that my understanding of the sentiment of the council here was that we would do that. We'll talk about how much that is once we see, after we're done cutting the budget. And it, you know, conceptually, it could get it down to the 6.5, it could
ones he
get it
just
down
said.
below 6.5.
I'd like to see it below with the
I
fund
tried to
balance
circle as
transfer.
he was going.
Any other suggestions, Council Watt?
Just a comment, I was going to say pretty much what Leroy said on winter maintenance. I wouldn't have gotten into the detail he did with the other things, the line items, but that's a good process. But on winter maintenance, I live out in the country, and virtually everybody has front-wheel drive with snow tires or four-wheel drive, and our winter maintenance has been fabulous. I mean, it's been better than I've ever seen it, and we could actually do with a little less plowing in the country and prioritize the major routes and save a little money. You know, my neighbors wouldn't like me saying that, but I really think it's been exceptionally.
I'll say this as well, as I plow the driveways and my tenants shovel the walk. And if we say to the people, hey, all the shopkeepers shovel the front of your walk.
That's a whole other night.
That's just, you know, so that's, if it's not overtime, I mean, we're not doing overtime. We're not approving overtime, and the sidewalks we're prioritizing schools,
Yeah.
and that's it.
We just don't have that density, right? That's that challenge, is we've got so many gaps that.
It's just the
it-
one
but
guy
I-
that doesn't, and then everyone's
Yeah.
walking through 3 feet
Yeah.
of snow, right?
Yeah, no,
As we get prepared to wrap up here, is it appropriate if we, I mean, I don't have any other comments really for the group, but if I take this home and send an email to Phil, what's the right course of action here to make sure that we're getting Phil all the info he needs so we can stick with our deadlines and timeline here?
Yeah, I think if you have suggestions, you can send them to Phil. He'll categorize them, and we can go over them again. They've captured the ones we've talked about tonight. You can copy everybody, or you can just send them to Phil, but we'll review them. I guess at this point, I think we should talk about another budget workshop, because I don't think we're going to wrap this thing up in an hour and a half next Monday. So, Mr. Manager, so we don't have a council meeting I didn't bring my work plan in, it's in the office, but when the first reading was scheduled for, which was scheduled for the 6th?
We've had to kind of pivot a bit. So your first reading will be on the May 6th
Yeah,
meeting now.
so if that's on the 6th, unless there's opposition, I think we should schedule another just budget workshop on on Monday, the 22nd, starting at 5:30. Is everyone in agreement on that? And we should try, people should go through this in some more detail and get your suggestions, before we get to the fund balance. To get to 6.5, we're looking for $450,000 in potential cuts.
And we've got how much, I'd like to know how much Counselor Walker
here,
cut.
Phil will
How's
have
that?
it. So
And-
within that 450 would be.
Yeah, it would be
his
Counselor
suggestion.
Walker's. I got a question. What if we put off for 6 months hiring a senior appraiser? Is that gonna cut that position in half? So let's say you can't hire him until calendar year 2025. Because we're not gonna have that position.
It'll
We're not
cut it in
gonna-
half.
That would cut that in half, right? Mm-hmm. Okay.
Yeah, so I think people, Council Walker has provided some suggestions. There'll probably be more if you can send those in. I guess what's our, Mr. Manager, what's our deadline on the CIP?
So I would like to have, my presentation will be on Monday. So really, that'll take up your workshop. So if we use that time, I'll give you some updates on where we are for numbers, but we'll use that time to talk about CIP, so that you are getting a full package on the 6th, when you start taking your votes. That'll be the timeline. You'll do your first reading, that'll
Yeah.
include CIP.
So we'll have a CIP workshop next Monday, and whatever folks send in,
Carry over.
you'll have a list.
Yeah.
Council Gary?
Tuesday.
Thank you,
Tuesday
Mr.
the
Mayor.
16th.
Is it too late to discuss any cuts, or does anybody have any ideas for cuts for the school department? Or is that boat sailed?
They have a
They,
meeting.
when, they have votes this week, correct?
Yes, on Wednesday.
Wednesday.
Yep.
So it's never too late. You can send guidance back to the school committee and ask them to cut it further. At this point, we've asked them to reduce to 5%.
I would recommend that if you've already sent that to them, let them do their work. They will come back. If there's a majority when it comes time to actually vote on that, that should be at an amendment level so that every council will weigh in on that and cast their vote for any change. You've already given them that direction, the way that I would recommend the council to move on that. That would then allow it to be done. You can make that change, but you make that change at the council meeting when you do the adopting of the school budget.
And I'll double check with Counselor Walker before we leave tonight, if that's okay. I think I've caught everything that he said, but if I did, it's about 130,000 that's been reduced based on his suggestions.
Because some of those amounts were already reduced by the manager's recommendations.
And,
school-
so I like the suggestion to reduce, if possible, the dues and subscriptions and perhaps trainings. My recollection from some of the presentations that some of those, in both of those items are required. So I don't know that I could suggest a dollar amount, but if possible, could you ask the departments? I mean, we're talking fractions of dollars, but if it's,
New council always suggests dues and subscriptions.
Yeah, we can go through, a lot, as you just said, a lot of it,
Well, I'm concerned with dues and
It's a terrible,
subscriptions,
I've
'cause-
asked to change the title name, right? Don't use dues and subscriptions, because it's really, majority of it's not that. It has to do with professional development and certifications.
Well, the certifications with the police chief, he acknowledged that there was some benefit to that by being accredited. That gives us some risk benefit that lowers on this. So I know that one's the one I don't want to touch because that helps us on another end of it. So
Yeah.
Yeah, I was thinking more if there are any optional in those two, and I don't know that there are.
it's start to look at something, you know.
I've noted that to go back and talk to the directors regarding that, and so we'll look at it.
Any other comments from the council for tonight?
What I can do too is Kelsey and I will go back through, and because some of the numbers, we're projecting out, right? So we're still getting some numbers in. We'll take a look at what some of those numbers we have coming in to see if there's any other adjustments. I think Councilor Milks talked about delaying the senior appraiser, so I'll work those, and I didn't hear any opposition to that, but we didn't really go around the room. But I'll work that into the manager's recommendations. So you'll see these reductions, the managers, if there's something in there that you're like, hey, you went too far with that, you'll be able to bring that back in when you do after your workshop. I can make sure that as long as we have consensus, I can start putting that in for your recommendation, so you're not having to do the amendments when it comes to you. You've already kind of worked together as a group. You've said, this is what I'd like to see. Then that'll go in as the council recommendations, and then you can vote them up or down.
Question, Mr. Mayor, Manager, when it comes to the deputy chief of EMS, if there was a thought of possibly delaying that, would that affect the grant?
I think let me go back to my sheet.
But it's not going to affect the general fund budget.
I did delay it.
Okay, you did, okay.
Yeah, I thought I did. The grant source.
So there's no, it's a wash.
That's right. Yeah, yeah,
Thank you.
yeah.
Anything further from the council?
Yeah, just one
Yeah,
question.
Council Walker.
Mr. Manager, in the regular salary for Recreation Department, you went from 425 to 493. Can you tell me what did that?
I think it was bringing some of the grant position, that grant position was funded through ARPA, so that rec specialist position, I think is definitely within that. Scrolling down to that right now.
So that was the department request amount was the 493. Phil's suggestion was 447,906.
So that difference was, a lot of those positions that are in there, they're not full-time positions. So a lot of those have like 30 hours. And so it might mean that we added 10 hours to one of those positions. That's what you're seeing in that.
I know working with the Recreation Department for years and years, I'd have a hard time to actually cut with everything that you have already moved and slid around for the hours that they put in and for all the programs that they run. And I know there are many, many volunteer people that do many of these hours. I'd be awful hard to agree to make any cuts to this department.
Anything else from the council?
I would echo Councilor Walker's sentiments.
Thank you. If not, we'll adjourn the workshop, and the next meeting will be workshop 5:30 on the 16th. The meeting is on Tuesday, the 16th, as 15th is a holiday. There'll be a budget workshop at 5:30 and the city council meeting at 7 p.m.